When I look back on that November night, the strangest part isn't the storm, or the man with blood on his knuckles, or even the way he whispered warnings like a prophet gone mad. The strangest part is how ordinary it all started. In 2014, I was 27 years old, living in a rundown apartment above a laundromat that never stopped rattling. I'd dropped out of community college after burning through loans and enthusiasm, and I was broke, flat broke. My landlord was already slipping warnings under my door about late rent, and my car coughed smoke like an old man trying to climb stairs. The Chevron gas station off I-70 wasn't just a job. It was the only thing keeping me from sleeping in that car. Night shifts were mine because no one else wanted them. The pay was barely enough to scrape by, but I told myself the quiet was worth it. I stocked shelves, mopped sticky floors, listened to the hum of refrigerators, and made bad coffee for truckers who smelled like diesel and regret. Sometimes I convinced myself I liked the solitude. At least there were no bosses breathing down my neck, no customers haggling over scratch-off tickets. Just me, the buzzing lights, and the clock on the wall dragging its hands through the night. But that Friday, November 14th, felt different from the moment my shift started. The storm rolled in early and grew meaner by the hour. By 2:15 a.m., the thunder shook the glass doors like fists pounding to be let inside, and the parking lot lights flickered in a rhythm that set my nerves on edge. Sheets of rain blew sideways, drumming against the building so hard it sounded like nails on a coffin lid. Around 2:30, the store was empty. I'd locked the side doors, checked the register twice, and settled at the counter with a dog-eared paperback I kept pretending to read. I wasn't even 2 paragraphs in when I spotted him. A man stood at pump 3. At first, I thought he was just another stranded driver caught in the storm, but his behavior didn't make sense. He wasn't pumping gas, wasn't checking a phone, wasn't even seeking shelter. He just paced in wide circles, hood clinging to his head, rain soaking him to the bone. Every few steps he looked toward the doors, and even through the storm, I felt the weight of his glances. I told myself not to overreact. People act strange when they're tired or desperate. Maybe he was working up the courage to come in and ask for help. Maybe he'd lost his wallet. But 10 minutes passed, then 15, and he stayed out there pacing, circling like a caged animal. When the banging came, it startled me so hard I nearly dropped my book. 3 knocks, slow, deliberate, heavy enough to rattle the glass. I rose halfway from my chair, heart hammering. The man stood close to the door now, his face shadowed under the hood. But I saw it, blood running down his knuckles, diluted by rain. He didn't look at me the way a man looks at a clerk. He looked at me the way a prisoner looks at a window. Company rules were clear. Don't open the doors after hours. But guilt twisted in my chest as I watched the storm tear at him. Against every shred of better judgment, I cracked the door and stepped aside. The man entered without a word, water dripping off him in steady streams. He didn't ask for towels, didn't head for the coffee machine. He just started pacing again, this time inside the store. I forced a nervous smile. "Rough night, huh? Need me to call somebody?" He stopped, turned, and that's when I saw his eyes. Blank, unfocused, like no one was home behind them. Then, in a low, rasping voice, he said, "Don't use the phone. Whatever you do, don't call anyone." At first, I thought I'd misheard. The storm made the building groan, rain hammered the roof, and the words seemed half swallowed by the thunder. "Sorry, what?" I asked, my voice shaky. The man turned away again, resuming his restless circles. His boots squeaked across the tile, leaving a trail of water. Every so often his lips moved, but his mutters blended into the storm. I leaned forward, straining to catch something, anything. "They're coming," he whispered finally, sharp enough to cut through the air. "Here." "They know I'm—" I stood frozen behind the counter, every nerve on edge. This wasn't a robbery. He hadn't asked for money or cigarettes, hadn't even glanced at the register. Still, fear gnawed at me. I thought about the landline under the counter, the one cops told us to use when trouble came knocking. My hand inched toward it. That's when his head snapped up. His eyes locked onto me, wide and empty. like he'd been tracking me with his mind, his bloody fists clenched at his sides. "Don't," he whispered again, sharper this time, a warning like the hiss of a snake. I froze, hand hovering over the phone. My throat was dry as paper. I tried to act calm to keep him talking. "Look, man, you're bleeding. Maybe I should call someone to..." He shook his head violently, rainwater spraying. "No, don't." His pacing grew quicker, more frantic. He muttered again, fragments I barely caught. "They know. Watching. Can't let them." The store felt smaller by the second. My skin crawled as if the walls were closing in. I wanted him gone, wanted the storm to swallow him up, but I didn't dare provoke him. And then, just like that, he stopped. He straightened, pulled his hood tighter around his face, and without a glance back, walked out into the storm. I slammed the lock on the door the second he was gone. My fingers shook as I snatched the phone, dialing 911 so fast I nearly mispunched the numbers. "Chevron on I-70, I stammered when the dispatcher answered. "A man just... He came in, he's bleeding, he's not right in the head. He threatened me. Please send someone." It took 20 minutes for the cruisers to arrive, red and blue lights flickering through the sheets of rain. 2 officers in raincoats sloshed through the lot. I explained everything, his pacing, the warnings, the blood. They found him 2 blocks away, walking calm as you please. When they brought him back, I nearly shouted, "That's him!" But the man looked different now. His eyes were clearer, his posture steady. He told the cops he'd just been trying to get warm, said he never stepped inside the store at all. The officers exchanged looks, then turned to me. Of Rain. Could have been someone else. "Sir, maybe you're mistaken." "Rough night." Lot I wanted to argue, but the words stuck in my throat. They let him go. That night should have ended there. The police brushed it off, and I went home soaked in adrenaline, telling myself I'd laugh about it in a week. But I didn't laugh, because I saw him again. The very next shift, he was across the street under a busted street lamp, standing motionless in the pouring rain. He didn't wave, didn't move, didn't even shift his weight. Just stared. When the light flickered, I swore I saw his mouth curve into the faintest smile. For the next 2 weeks, he appeared off and on, sometimes near the bus stop, sometimes at the edge of the lot. Once, I swear, behind the dumpster out back. Always watching, never approaching. I told my manager, Daryl, but he shrugged. Probably some homeless guy. Ignore him. Ignore him? I couldn't. Not when the phone at the station rang late one night, and when I answered, I heard nothing but faint breathing. Then a whisper. "Don't." I nearly threw the receiver across the room. Sleep started slipping from me. I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying that night over and over. Every creak outside sounded like boots on pavement. Every shadow near the window felt like him. One night, I dreamed I answered the phone again, and it wasn't a whisper I heard. It was laughter. Low, slow, stretched like someone savoring the sound. I woke drenched in sweat, swearing the dream followed me into the waking world. By late November, fear became routine. I carried it like a second skin. I kept a bat under the counter at work and a kitchen knife under my pillow at home. I drove to the station even though I lived less than a mile away. Walking felt too exposed. Then came the night I saw him closer than ever. The storm had returned, not as fierce as before, but steady enough to empty the streets. Around 3 a.m., I looked up from the register and froze. He was there, standing at the edge of the pumps, water streaming off his hood. His eyes were locked on me through the glass. Every instinct screamed at me to run out and confront him, demand answers. But something deeper, something primal, told me not to. It whispered, "If you get close, you won't come back." The phone rang. My stomach turned as I picked it up. Again, only static. And then the voice, "Don't." I slammed it down. When I looked back out, he was gone. By December, I couldn't take it anymore. The job wasn't worth the terror. I quit without notice, packed my things into my smoke-belching car, and left Springfield behind. But leaving didn't end it. Even now, years later, I sometimes see him. Not always. Not clearly. But I'll catch a hooded figure across a parking lot, or standing under a streetlight during a rainstorm, and my blood runs cold. And every time the phone rings late at night, I hesitate before answering, because in the back of my mind, I still hear that whisper. Soft, warning, unshakable. Don't. That night taught me something I've never forgotten. Not every threat looks like a weapon, and not every warning should be ignored. Sometimes survival isn't about bravery or logic. It's about trusting the instinct that tells you something is wrong, even when no one else believes you. Because the worst dangers in life aren't always the ones we can see. People always ask why I hate long night drives, why I tense up whenever someone suggests stopping for gas at some half-lit station in the middle of nowhere. I never tell the full story. I usually shrug and say something like, bad experience once. But the truth is, what happened in Boulder Creek still follows me, even after all these years. In 2017, I was 24, full of restless energy and stubborn pride. My girlfriend Jessica and I had been dating about a year, and that summer we decided to take a road trip through the Woods. We wanted to breathe the damp air of ancient forests, climb ridges, get lost on trails where cell service vanished and the stars actually showed up. For a week, it felt like we were running on freedom. No deadlines, no jobs breathing down our necks, just us, our beat-up sedan, and winding roads. But a week of travel wears you down. On the last night, June 3rd, we'd pushed farther than we should have. We were heading south, debating whether to stop at a motel or just drive through the night and crash in our own bed by morning. I kept insisting I was fine to drive. I didn't want to waste money on a motel. Jess, though, kept giving me side-eye from the passenger seat. "You're fading," she said, her voice soft but sharp. "I'm fine," I muttered, gripping the wheel tighter. "You've been saying that for an hour." "Jess, I got this. Let's just keep moving." She sighed, leaning back. I knew she was right, but pride is a hell of a drug. When we saw the glow of a gas station sign off Highway 9, I pulled in, pretending I only needed to refuel. The place looked like something out of another decade. One flickering fluorescent bulb hummed above the pumps. A crooked wooden sign over the office read, "Miller's Gas Service, family-owned since 1969. An old pickup sat off to the side, no driver in sight. The lot was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that makes you second-guess every sound. Jess gave me a look that said she didn't like it. I brushed it off. "Quick stop," I said. "Then we're back on the road." I slid out to handle the pump while Jess went inside to grab water. The night air smelled damp, heavy with the threat of rain. I jammed the nozzle in, trying to ignore how the buzzing light over me kept flickering, like it might cut out any second. That's when everything started to turn. When I pulled the nozzle free, gasoline splashed across my hand, sharp fumes burning my nose. Cursing under my breath, I shook it off and glanced at the car. That's when I saw them, deep scratches running along the driver's side door. Long, jagged, deliberate. They hadn't been there earlier. For a second, I thought maybe I'd scraped a branch on a narrow road, but these weren't the random lines of bark or gravel. They looked more like claw marks or like someone had dragged a tool along the paint with purpose. I froze, staring. Then Jess came out of the store pale as death, eyes wide. "Claire," she whispered, gripping my arm. "We need to go now." "What? Why? We haven't even paid yet. There's blood," she hissed. "In the office, on the cabinet. Nobody's in there." My heart lurched. I opened my mouth, but before I could say a word, a heavy thud echoed from behind the store. Someone was out there. The sound wasn't faint. It wasn't something you could dismiss as pipes or the wind. It was solid, like a boot landing hard in a puddle. Jess and I both froze, eyes locked on the corner of the building. The rain had picked up, tapping against the metal awning like fingers drumming on a desk. I forced my voice low. "Get in the car." We scrambled inside, slamming the doors, my fingers fumbling for the locks. The engine coughed when I turned the key. Once, twice. Dead silence followed. My chest tightened. Come on," I muttered, twisting it again. Nothing. Jess kept darting glances toward the tree line that pressed against the edge of the lot. The woods there were thick, black as ink, branches swaying with the storm. "Claire," she whispered, her breath fogging the glass. "Someone's out there." I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that we were just tired, that our imaginations were filling in shadows. But then, in the flicker of the fluorescent light, I saw it too. A figure, tall, motionless, standing between the pumps, hood pulled low, face hidden, just watching. My stomach dropped. The phone booth sat on the far edge of the lot. I spotted it the same time Jess did. Without hesitation, she grabbed a handful of coins from the console. "I'll call for help," she said, already shoving the door open. "Jess, wait," I shouted, but she was running, rain plastering her hair to her face. I locked the door behind her, heart hammering as I kept my eyes on the figure. It hadn't moved, but the longer I stared, the less human it seemed. The shoulders too stiff, the head tilted just enough to feel wrong. From the booth, Jess picked up the receiver, fumbling with coins. I pressed my hand to the horn, ready to blast it if I had to. Then I heard her voice, sharp with fear. "The line's dead. It's cut." A crash split the night, metal striking metal. I spun toward the sound, my pulse thundering. The old pickup truck's headlights blazed to life. Its engine roared like it had been waiting all along. The truck rolled forward slowly, deliberately, blocking the only exit out of the lot. Jess bolted back toward me, slipping in puddles, yanking the car door open. "Go, go, go!" I twisted the key again, begging, praying. The engine sputtered, coughed, then roared awake. I slammed the pedal to the floor, tires shrieking as the car fishtailed toward the road. The truck lunged forward too, lights burning holes in the back of my skull. We barely swerved around it, the side mirror grazing its bumper as I shot onto the highway. My heart was slamming so hard it drowned out the rain. Jess clutched my arm, gasping for air. Behind us, in the rear view, the gas station shrank into blackness. The truck didn't follow. But the silence it left was somehow worse. We didn't stop for 20 miles. The rain poured steady, headlights carving tunnels through the dark highway. My knuckles were white around the wheel, sweat mixing with rain still dripping down my forehead. Jess sat rigid beside me, one hand gripping the door handle like it was the only thing tethering her to the earth. Finally, a neon sign appeared ahead. A 24-hour diner. Relief washed over me so hard I nearly sobbed. We pulled in, our car shuddering as if it might collapse right there in the lot. Inside, the diner buzzed with fluorescent light, half empty with a few truckers hunched over coffee. The normalcy felt surreal. I almost laughed when the waitress greeted us like nothing had happened. Jess, though, didn't waste time. "We need to call the sheriff," she told the waitress, her voice hoarse. Minutes later, we were on the phone with dispatch. I tried to explain everything. The scratches on the car, the blood in the office, the figure, the truck. My words came out jumbled, but I didn't care. Deputies said they'd check it out. By the time they got to Miller's gas service, though, they called us back with confusion in their voices. "Ma'am, the place looks fine. No blood, no truck, no sign of anyone. Clerk says he was home sick tonight." I stared at the phone like it had grown teeth. Jess leaned close, whispering, "They don't believe us." We stayed at that diner until dawn, too scared to drive, too shaken to sleep. Every time the door swung open, Jess flinched. Every time headlights swept past the window, my heart jumped into my throat. The next morning, the world looked ordinary again. Sunlight glinted off wet roads. Birds sang like nothing had happened. But the scratches on my car door were still there, ugly and undeniable. Proof. When I showed them to the deputy who met us in daylight, he frowned. Branch. Highways full of debris after storms. Could have been a "I wanted to scream," wanted us to see it. Branches don't make marks like that. Someone was there. Someone he gave me a tired look, like I was just another traveler with too many ghost stories. More we can do. Nothing, that was it. They left us with coffee and pity. But Jess and I knew better. We never figured out what happened at Miller's. Whether it was someone lying in wait, whether the blood was real or imagined, whether the truck belonged to a predator or a ghost, I don't know. All I know is we got away. Barely. To this day, I avoid late-night fueling stops. Jess still wakes up some nights, shaking from dreams of footsteps circling us in the rain. We don't talk about it often, but when we do, her eyes always go distant, like she's standing back in that lot again, staring at the figure that shouldn't have been there. And every time I hear a payphone ring in a movie, my skin crawls, remembering the sound of Jess yelling, "The line's dead." Because some places aren't meant for stopping, and some shadows aren't meant to be seen. That night taught me that safety is often a matter of instinct, not convenience. We ignored the warning signs, the dead station, the scratches, the silence, because we wanted to keep moving, to save time and money. But danger doesn't announce itself with flashing lights. It waits in the quiet places where you least expect it. If something feels wrong, listen to it. Your gut may save you long before the police can. I never thought I'd end up working nights at a gas station. Life has a way of humbling you, reminding you that plans and dreams don't always survive the day-to-day grind. I'm Michael Harris, 34, single father of 2. My kids, Evan, 9, and Lily, 7, are the best thing I've ever done, even if I haven't been around as much as I should. Their mother, my ex-wife, moved to Oregon after the divorce, and most weeks I only see them on weekends. The distance hurts. So does the child support that drains most of my paycheck. By day, I clean office buildings, vacant spaces that smell like old coffee and industrial carpet. The money isn't enough, so when a buddy told me Canyon Gas was hiring for overnight shifts, I took it. Figured I could stack extra cash, maybe get ahead, maybe buy the kids something more than just fast food dinners when they came over. But the reality of that job hit quick. Empty parking lot, flickering neon sign, endless hours of quiet broken only by the hum of coolers and the occasional customer buying cigarettes or cheap beer. Canyon Gas wasn't modern like the stations you see along big highways. It was an old brick building that felt like it belonged in the 70s. 2 levels, ground floor with the register, coffee machines and dusty shelves, and an upstairs that used to be offices. The upstairs had been locked for years. At least that's what Franklin, the other night clerk, told me. Franklin had been around forever, a wiry man with gray stubble and a smoker's cough. He worked alternating shifts with me. We'd usually only overlap for a few minutes at shift change, enough for him to mumble something like, "Don't fall asleep," before heading out. For the first week, I didn't think about the upstairs. I had enough to worry about. Long hours, bills piling up, the guilt of missing bedtime stories with Evan and Lily. But then the noises started. The first night it happened, I was restocking the candy rack when I heard faint clicking above me. At first I thought it was pipes, maybe the roof expanding in the cold. But the sound had rhythm, steady, like someone typing on an old keyboard. I laughed it off, figured I was overtired. 2 nights later I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, crossing back and forth across the ceiling. I froze, mop in hand, my chest tight. The station was empty, locked up tight. I forced myself to shake it off, convincing myself raccoons or rats had found their way inside. But the third time was different. I was mopping by the drink coolers when I heard it. A girl's voice, soft, humming a lullaby, the kind of tune you'd sing to a child as they drifted off to sleep. My skin prickled. I dropped the mop, staring up at the ceiling like the sound might break through the tiles. I didn't tell anyone at first. Who would believe me? But a week later, when Franklin came in to relieve me, I asked, "You ever hear anything? Upstairs?" He froze, his eyes sharper than I'd ever seen them. Then he shook his head slowly. "There. Trust me. Just don't." "Don't go up." That was all he said, and no matter how many times I pressed him, he never explained. The problem was, once you hear something like that, you can't unhear it. The noises kept coming, typing, footsteps, humming, even muffled conversations like a meeting was happening above me. I started recording with my phone, determined to catch proof. But every clip came back silent, and when the storm rolled in one February night and the wind rattled the windows, I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. I had to see for myself. The storm had been brewing all evening. By midnight, rain lashed against the glass doors. The parking lot was a mirror of black water, and the air carried that metallic taste storms always bring. Business was dead. Not a soul came by after midnight, which left me alone with the humming coolers and my thoughts. That night, the noises were louder. I heard typing again, rapid, urgent, like someone pounding out an email. Then came the shuffle of footsteps, heavy and deliberate, as though boots pressed into tile just overhead. I stood at the counter, gripping the edge so hard my knuckles went white. I told myself I wouldn't do it. I told myself Franklin's warning was enough. But by 2 a.m., curiosity had burned a hole in my chest. I kept glancing at the back wall, where a row of keys hung. Most were for stockrooms, restroom doors, maintenance closets. One key, though, was different. Old, iron, labeled in faded tape. Storage. My hand shook as I pulled it free. I don't know what I expected. Maybe to find the upstairs empty, dusty, full of junk. Maybe to laugh at myself for being spooked. But part of me hoped, no, needed, to prove I wasn't crazy. The stairwell was narrow, the kind that made you feel closed in. Each step creaked as I climbed, echoing far louder than I wanted. Halfway up, the smell hit me, damp rot, mildew, and beneath it something sharper. Metallic, almost like blood. The key slid into the lock with a scrape, and when I pushed open the door, the air that rushed out was thick and foul. My stomach turned. The upstairs floor stretched before me like a graveyard of office life. Broken chairs with their cushions spilling foam, cracked computer monitors stacked in corners, papers scattered everywhere like people had left in a hurry. The ceiling tiles sagged, stained with water damage. A flickering fluorescent tube buzzed weakly, casting a pale glow. I stepped inside, heart hammering. My flashlight cut across overturned desks and filing cabinets. Dust swirled in the beam, but beneath it I saw something worse. Footprints, fresh, pressed into the dust, too recent to be decades old. Then I heard them. Footsteps, not mine. Coming from the far end of the room, heavy, steady. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark suit, sharp lines that looked like something from another decade. His shoes gleamed, polished, impossibly clean compared to the filth around him. His face was unreadable, pale, eyes downcast. I froze, breath caught in my throat. He didn't look at me, didn't acknowledge I was there. He walked past overturned chairs, moving with purpose, until he reached an old desk near the wall. He placed his hand on it gently, almost reverently, then whispered something I couldn't catch. Then he turned, walked to the far wall, and pressed his hand to a button, an elevator button. My heart slammed against my ribs. There was no elevator upstairs. None. And yet, the button glowed. I don't remember breathing. I don't remember moving. All I know is one moment he was there, and the next he wasn't. He stepped toward the wall, the glow of the fake elevator button bright against the decay, and then he vanished. Not faded, not walked away, just gone. I stumbled back, hitting my shoulder against the doorframe. My flashlight clattered to the floor, spinning. I scrambled, grabbing it, sweeping the beam across the room. Empty. Papers fluttered on the ground as though stirred by wind, though no windows were open. My legs carried me before my brain caught up. I bolted down the stairwell, every creak sounding like footsteps chasing me. By the time I slammed the door shut behind me and locked it, my chest was heaving, sweat dripping down my neck. For the rest of that shift, I sat behind the counter, gripping a cup of stale coffee like it was an anchor. Every sound made me flinch. I half expected the suited man to walk through the front door, silent, demanding I follow him upstairs. When Franklin arrived at 6 to relieve me, he stopped short at the sight of me. "You look like hell," he said. I wanted to play it off, but my voice cracked. "Franklin, what's upstairs?" He studied me for a long time. His eyes softened, like he pitied me. Then he shook his head. "Told you not to go." "That's not an answer," I snapped. "Who is he? What is that place?" Franklin's lips pressed into a thin line. Finally, he muttered, "Some places hold on to what people leave behind. Work, worry, regret. This station's been around a long time, longer than you know." That was all he'd give me. No matter how much I pushed, he clammed up. But his eyes told me one thing. He knew. He'd always known. After that night, I refused to take shifts alone. I traded, begged, even gave up hours just to make sure Franklin overlapped with me. He didn't ask questions, but I caught the look in his eyes. He understood. Still, the noises didn't stop. If anything, they got worse. Footsteps every night, pacing, typing so frantic it raised the hairs on my neck. Once I swear I heard phones ringing up there, dozens at once, like a call center from hell. And always, under it all, the lullaby. The lullaby broke me. It reminded me of Lily, the way I used to hum to her when she was small, when she curled into my chest and finally fell asleep. Hearing it in that place, cold, empty, abandoned, felt like a mockery of everything I'd lost. I started drinking more coffee just to stay sharp. I kept the radio on, talk shows and static filling the silence. But no matter how loud the noise, I still heard it. Always above me, always waiting. I never went back upstairs. Not once. It's been years since that job. I left Canyon Gas not long after, found steadier work that didn't eat my soul. But sometimes, late at night, when storms roll in and the wind rattles the windows, I swear I still hear it. The lullaby. Soft, gentle, drifting through the ceiling like a ghost of responsibility I couldn't outrun. I don't fear burglars or drunks the way most people in late-night jobs do. What unsettles me is simpler. The idea that some spaces never let go. That the things people carried, their exhaustion, their regrets, their endless labor, got etched into the walls, replaying forever. And I wonder, when my kids are grown, when I'm long gone, if they'll still hear me in the quiet, typing, pacing, humming them to sleep. The night shifts at Canyon Gas taught me a truth I carry to this day. Not all hauntings are ghosts. Some are the echoes of lives lived under pressure, of people consumed by work, regret, and responsibility. I learned that ignoring your limits, pushing through exhaustion, burying pain, leaves marks deeper than you realize. Some places remember, some people too. The lesson is simple. Listen to your own breaking point. Don't let life turn you into just another echo in the ceiling. If you'd asked me at 21 where I'd be at 29, I would have painted a picture that had nothing to do with midnight gas stations and a broken-down Toyota. Back then, I thought I was headed for something brighter. Maybe music, maybe writing, maybe a life with someone who loved me. But life doesn't care about your sketches of the future. Somewhere between student loans, dead-end jobs, and a string of awkward relationships, I ended up floating. My name's Ryan Cooper. I live in White Plains, New York, in a one-bedroom apartment with paper-thin walls and neighbors who fight louder than any TV drama. I make just enough at my IT support job to cover rent and ramen. My parents call every week asking when I'm going to settle down. Truth is, I've been looking, mostly online, which is how I ended up in Pittsburgh that weekend. I'd been talking to a girl for a couple months, Kara. She had the kind of smile in her pictures that made me forget how lonely I was. We traded playlists, inside jokes, stories about the futures we swore were still out there. Meeting her in person felt like the start of something real. Except it wasn't. Dinner was a train wreck. We had nothing to talk about beyond what we'd already texted. She kept glancing at her phone, laughing at messages from someone else. By dessert, we both knew it wasn't going anywhere. We shook hands in the parking lot like business partners ending a meeting. I got in my Toyota, turned up the radio, and tried to laugh it off. The Pennsylvania Turnpike stretched long and empty. I drove with that kind of restless energy that comes after disappointment. Sometime past 1 a.m, my fuel light blinked. I cursed under my breath. I hadn't planned for that. The next sign read, Exit 219, Fuel, Food. I veered off, figuring I'd grab gas, a coffee, and keep moving. That decision changed everything. The Sunoco sat alone, its lights buzzing against the dark. The lot was empty except for a semi idling by the diesel pumps. Inside, through glass doors smeared with fingerprints, I saw a tired clerk hunched over his phone. I swiped my card, pumped gas, and told myself this was just another pit stop on another lonely night. Then I saw her. A girl at the edge of the lot, barefoot, stumbling, her clothes torn like she'd been dragged through hell. Her hair was matted with blood. At first I thought she was drunk, maybe a runaway, but then her eyes locked on mine, wide, terrified. She ran straight for me. She was gasping when she reached me, voice cracking. They're coming back. Please, please, you have to help me. I froze. Everything in me wanted to bolt, but something about her desperation pinned me to the spot. She was young, maybe 20, 21. Her arms were scraped raw, her ribs clutched like each breath was pain. I unlocked my passenger door without thinking. She dove in, curling up like a cornered animal. Drive, she begged. Don't stop here, they'll find me. My first instinct was my phone. I pulled it out, dialing 911. The moment she saw, she lunged, grabbing my wrist with surprising strength. No, not yet. Please, just go. Just drive. My stomach knotted. Every rational part of me screamed, call the police, but her eyes, wide, wet, pleading, made me hesitate. I started the engine. As I pulled toward the highway ramp, headlights flared in the mirror. A black SUV rolled into the lot, stopping by the pumps. 3 men climbed out. Even from a distance, I could see the way they scanned the place, sharp, intent, like predators. One of them carried a baseball bat, tapping it against his palm. The girl ducked low in her seat, whispering, "That's them." My throat dried. I swerved, circling back into the lot, heart hammering. If I merged onto the highway, they'd see us. If I stayed put, we were trapped. I parked by the far side of the store and ran inside. The clerk looked up, startled. I hissed, "Now. There's a girl. She's hurt. Call the cops." He blinked, confused, but picked up the phone. Through the glass, I saw the men talking to the trucker. One pointed toward the lot. My pulse roared in my ears. Then the girl bolted. She flew out of my car, barefoot feet slapping against wet pavement, sprinting toward the tree line. The men shouted, chasing her. Branches cracked as they vanished into the dark. "Come on," I yelled at the clerk. He was fumbling with the phone, hands shaking. "Hurry." I ran out into the night. The woods behind the station swallowed sound. Rain dripped from branches, leaves slick underfoot. I stumbled through the dark, shouting her name, but I realized I didn't even know it. I caught glimpses, her pale figure flashing between trees, the shadows of men chasing, their shouts carrying, then silence. Nothing but my ragged breath and the thud of my shoes on mud. My flashlight app barely cut the darkness. The beam caught branches, empty ground, no footprints. It was like the forest had eaten them whole. By the time I stumbled back into the lot, red and blue lights were flashing. Police cars had pulled in, sirens cutting the night. I waved them down, babbling about the girl, the SUV, the men. They spread out, flashlights slicing through trees. The search lasted hours. Dogs barked, officers shouted, but they found nothing. No girl, no SUV. Not even tire tracks where I swore it had been. When they took my statement, I could hear the doubt in their voices. Barefoot, bleeding, and 3 men were chasing her? Sir, you say she was... Yes. My voice cracked. I saw them, I swear. They exchanged looks. One patted my shoulder. We'll keep looking. But their eyes said they didn't believe me. Days turned to weeks, but I couldn't let it go. Every time I drove the turnpike, I pulled off at exit 219. I'd buy coffee, sit in the lot, and stare at the tree line, hoping. The clerk recognized me. You still thinking about that night? I nodded. You saw her, right? You called the cops. He frowned. You, alone. I called, but man, he hesitated. The footage didn't show her or the SUV, just I laughed, but it came out hollow. That's impossible. They showed me the tape, he said softly. Alone. You were talking to nobody, running into the woods. The words hit me like a fist. I shook my head. No, I'm not crazy. She was real. But late at night, lying in bed, doubt gnawed at me. Maybe loneliness had twisted my brain. Maybe the long drive, the failed date, the exhaustion. It all bled together into some hallucination. And yet when I closed my eyes, I could still feel the weight of her hand on my wrist. The raw fear in her voice. The way she whispered, "They're coming back." It's been years now. I still take that stretch of the turnpike sometimes, still pull into the Sunoco. The lot looks the same, fluorescent lights buzzing, clerk behind the counter. But every time I catch myself staring at the tree line listening for footsteps. Was she real? I don't know. Maybe I saw a ghost. Maybe I imagined the whole thing. Or maybe she was flesh and blood running for her life and the world just swallowed her before anyone else could help. The only thing I know for certain is that something happened that night. Something I can't explain. Something that won't let me go. And sometimes when the road is quiet and the night too long, I swear I hear her again. A whisper in the back seat. Please, drive. That night at exit 219 taught me that sometimes the line between real and imagined is thin. But whether she was flesh and blood or just a figment of my tired, lonely mind, the message was the same. People are running from things we can't see, carrying battles we'll never know. If you're given the chance to help, don't hesitate. Even if the world doubts what you saw, compassion never goes wasted. When I look back at my life, I never would have guessed that I'd end up spending nights alone in a half-lit parking lot, patrolling cracked pavement and humming soda machines. I wasn't the kind of kid who dreamed about being a security guard. I grew up in Amarillo, born and raised the son of a mechanic and a diner waitress. My friends went off to college or the military, some started families early. Me? I stumbled through jobs, warehouse work, construction, a stint unloading trucks at Walmart, until the Green Valley gas station offered me steady hours and just enough pay to keep the lights on in my apartment. I was 26 then, not old, but already carrying the kind of exhaustion you see in men twice my age. The kind that doesn't just come from work, but from not knowing where your life is headed. I had split with my girlfriend the year before. My truck was always one repair away from dying, and most days I felt like I was drifting. Taking the overnight security job wasn't about ambition. It was about needing something that made me feel useful, even if it was just walking loops around gas pumps while the world slept. The Green Valley station had been around forever. My uncle used to stop there when he was trucking through Texas, so the place carried a faint nostalgia for me. But by 2007, it wasn't much to look at. The neon sign flickered with half its letters burnt out. The paint on the walls was peeling and half the lights in the lot buzzed or didn't work at all. Still, it was open 24 hours, sitting just off I-40 where truckers came in for fuel, cigarettes, and a cup of bad coffee before heading back on the highway. My shift was simple. Make rounds every 30 minutes, keep an eye on the pumps, check the car wash, and make sure nobody tried sleeping in their cars too long. Most nights it was dead quiet, except for the hum of semis barreling down the interstate and the steady drone of crickets. The stillness was both peaceful and unsettling. You spend enough nights walking alone through wide open spaces, and you start hearing things. Your own footsteps echoing louder than they should. The rattle of leaves you swear sounds like voices. By my second week, I'd settled into routine. I carried a flashlight, a radio that connected me to Lori, the night cashier, and a phone in case something went wrong. Nothing ever did, at least not until September 14th, the night that has stayed with me ever since. That Friday started like any other. I grabbed a gas station burrito, made small talk with Lori about her kids, and stepped out into the night. Around 1:45 a.m., I was taking pictures of a leaking diesel pump with my phone, crouched down and focused on getting a clear shot. That's when it happened. The sensation. Not a sound exactly, not even movement. Just the undeniable feeling that someone was standing directly behind me, close enough that I could hear their breath. My stomach twisted. I spun around, flashlight ready. And that's when I saw him. The chair near the vending machines was supposed to be empty. I'd passed by it 15 minutes earlier, and it had been empty then. Now it wasn't. An old man sat there, perfectly still, his posture stiff like he'd been waiting for me. He wore dusty denim overalls, scuffed leather boots, and a sun-bleached cowboy hat pulled low over his brow. His hands rested neatly in his lap, fingers laced like he was posing for a photograph. The first thing I noticed was how out of place he looked. No truck nearby, no car, no reason for him to be sitting in that chair at nearly 2 a.m. He didn't look homeless. His clothes, though old, weren't ragged. He looked like someone pulled straight out of an older time, someone who didn't belong under the harsh glow of fluorescent lights and soda machines. "Sir?" My voice came out sharper than I intended. "Need help? Station's closed inside for the night." "You nothing." He didn't even blink. I felt the sweat crawl down my spine. I tried again, softer. "Do you need a ride somewhere?" That's when his head moved. Just slightly, the brim of his hat angling in my direction. The sound of the chair creaked faintly like wood shifting under weight. But his body didn't move at all. My flashlight flickered. Panic shot through me. My hand shook and the light clattered to the ground, its beam rolling wildly across the concrete. When I snatched it back up, the chair was empty. The air felt heavier, like the night had thickened. I scanned the lot, every corner, every shadow near the car wash and the diesel pumps. Nothing. He was gone. I radioed Lori, my voice cracking. "Someone's outside, by the vending machines." Her reply was immediate and terrified. "Get inside now." "I just saw something on the monitor by pump 6. Ryan, I didn't argue. I sprinted for the door. Inside, Lori's face was pale. She pointed at the small security monitor. "Look." The grainy black and white footage showed the vending machine corner. There he was, the old man, seated exactly as I'd seen him. The camera caught every detail, right down to the tilt of his hat. For a moment I felt relief, proof. I wasn't crazy. Then the feed glitched, a quick flicker of static, and when the image cleared, the chair was empty. No man standing, no shadow walking away. Just gone. My heart thudded. Lori covered her mouth. "What the hell?" We debated calling the cops. I didn't want to. I already felt stupid. But Lori insisted, so I dialed. When the officers arrived 20 minutes later, we replayed the footage for them. They leaned in, squinting, whispering to each other. "You said you saw him in person?" one asked. "Yes," I said firmly. "I spoke to him. He was right there." They searched the lot, the car wash, even the old storage shed out back. Nothing. The only thing they found was the chair itself. Deep scratches along both armrests, grooves that hadn't been there before, like someone had been gripping hard enough to leave marks in the metal. One of the cops shrugged. "Into the fields when you weren't looking." Could have been a drifter, playing some prank. Maybe he slipped off, but I knew better. I hadn't just seen him. I'd felt him. After that night, my rounds changed. I still walked the lot, checked the pumps, but I never lingered by the vending machines. Every time I passed that red chair, my chest tightened. Lori asked me once, weeks later, if I thought he was a ghost. I laughed it off, but deep down I wasn't so sure. Amarillo has its share of ghost stories, abandoned houses, old motels, but I'd never believed in them. I believed in things I could touch, fix, explain. and yet I couldn't shake it. Sometimes I'd swear I felt his eyes on me from across the lot. On stormy nights, I'd catch myself staring at the chair, half expecting him to be sitting there again, waiting. The strangest part? A few truckers claimed they'd seen him too. A man in overalls, sitting alone, watching the station. They described him just as I had, though none of them ever saw him vanish. One trucker told me, "My daddy used to talk about a guy like that. Said he always hung around stations on this stretch back in the 80s. The story spread. A drifter who died somewhere out there on the highway. Some said he'd been hit by a truck. Others swore he'd collapsed in the heat of summer, left alone on the side of the road. Nobody knew for sure. But I did know this. Whatever he wasn't just a story. I quit Green Valley a year later. Too many long nights, too much wear on my nerves. But even now, when I drive down I-40 and past that flickering neon sign, I glance toward the vending machine corner. The chair is still there, and every time I feel the same cold weight in my stomach. The memory of his silent stare. I don't know if he was a drifter's ghost, a trick of my mind, or something else entirely. What I do know is that I wasn't the only one. Lori saw him on the tape. Truckers swore they caught glimpses, and those scratches on the chair never faded. Some nights when the road is quiet and the radio is low, I think about him. I wonder if he's still sitting there waiting for someone else to notice. Waiting for another guard with a flashlight to walk by and feel the breath of a stranger at their back. I tell myself it was nothing. Just a moment. A shadow. Fatigue playing tricks. But deep down I know better. Because some things stay with you forever. Not everything in life can be explained, and not every presence can be dismissed. Sometimes what we experience doesn't fit into logic or reason, and that's okay. What matters is how we carry it, whether with fear or with respect. In the quiet stretches of life, we're reminded that we are never as alone as we think we are. Some of the clearest memories I hold aren't the happy ones, but the ones that scared me so badly they carved themselves into my bones. July 23rd, 1995, is one of those nights. Back then, I was 35, working as a regional salesman for an equipment company. My wife, Elaine, had convinced me that summer to finally take the trip we'd been putting off for years. A proper family road trip, coast to coast, just us and the open highway. We'd rented a Chevy Lumina from the airport in Phoenix, loaded it with snacks, tapes, and maps, and told our 6-year-old son, Tommy, we were going to see the country together. I wanted it to be the kind of memory that would outshine all the long hours I spent away from home working. Elaine wanted adventure, something outside of our predictable suburban life. We got both, but not the way either of us imagined. That Sunday had been brutal. The desert sun in New Mexico felt like it was leaning on our backs with all its weight. I had driven 6 straight hours, stopping only once so Tommy could stretch his legs. The Lumina rattled on every bump, and the AC had started giving out somewhere near Gallup. By the time the sun dipped low, we were already running on fumes. Elaine was tense. She had the road atlas spread open on her lap, her finger tracing highways. "Nick, I told you we should have stayed on the interstate," she muttered. "This shortcut of yours isn't saving us any time." "Relax," I said, though my throat was dry. "The tank. We'll hit the highway again soon. Just need to top off." But the truth was, I wasn't sure. The gauge was sinking fast, and there was nothing around us but miles of desert and dark sky. No towns, no billboards, just that endless stretch of 2-lane road. Then, like a small miracle, I saw it. The faint glow of neon way out ahead. I slowed, squinting. A gas station, barely holding itself together in the middle of nowhere. The sign read, Red Mesa Fuel Diner. One pump, flickering lights, a squat diner attached that looked closed for the night. There was a single pickup truck parked at the far end of the lot, but otherwise the place looked deserted. Elaine sighed in relief but still didn't sound convinced. "Just fill it up quick." "Nick, this place gives me the creeps." I pulled in and killed the engine. The quiet of the desert wrapped around us, broken only by the ticking of the car's cooling engine and the buzz of the neon sign. Tommy was asleep in the back, his small head pressed to the window. Elaine turned and looked at him, then back at me, her eyes unsettled. I tried to keep it light. "We'll be in and out, 5 minutes tops." But something about that station already felt wrong. I slid out of the driver's seat, the heat from the asphalt still rising even though night had fallen. I grabbed the pump handle and started fueling. The numbers on the old mechanical dial ticked slowly upward, each click echoing too loudly in the stillness. Elaine cracked the window just enough to whisper, "Nick, hurry up, I don't like this." "Relax," I said again, though my own nerves were prickling. The whole place had that forgotten quality, like no one had used it in years, but somehow it was still standing. The windows of the diner were dark, and I couldn't tell if it was boarded up or just shut for the night. That's when I heard it shuffling. Not the light scurry of an animal, but heavy, deliberate footsteps near the bushes beside the station. My head snapped in that direction. Nothing. I tightened my grip on the pump, telling myself it was just the desert playing tricks. Then he came out. A man leapt from the shadows and my whole body froze. He was thin, wiry, wearing a dirty hood that covered most of his face, and he was pointing a shotgun directly at me. Elaine screamed inside the car. My hands shot up before I could think. My chest thumped so hard I thought it might crack a rib. "Wallet. Keys. Now," the man barked. His voice was rough, desperate. I tried to speak, but nothing came out at first. Finally, I stammered, "Take whatever you want, just don't." "Please, my kid's in the car." That's when another voice cut through the night. "Drop it." From the shadows of the diner, a figure emerged fast, authoritative. A man in a sheriff's uniform, gun drawn, charging toward us. His voice carried the kind of weight you don't argue with. "Put that weapon down right now." For a long second, none of us moved. The hooded man's eyes darted between me and the sheriff. His hands twitched on the shotgun. Then, in a moment that still chills me, he lowered it. Not with fear, almost casually, like he'd lost interest. He turned and walked back into the desert, swallowed by darkness. The sheriff kept his gun trained until the man was gone, then turned to me. "You folks all right?" Elaine was out of the car now, clutching Tommy, who had woken up crying. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. I was shaking too, though I tried to stand straight. "Who was that?" I asked. The sheriff's eyes flicked toward the desert. "You shouldn't be traveling these back roads this late." "Someone who's been causing trouble out here." I wanted answers, but he didn't offer any. He just urged us toward the car, his tone firm. "And get moving. Don't stop until you're back on the interstate." Philip, I tried pressing him. "But who is he? Why's he out here?" The sheriff shook his head. "Doesn't matter, just go." There was something strange in his eyes, weariness, maybe guilt, like he knew more than he could say. We finished fueling in silence. Elaine climbed in first, still clutching Tommy. I got behind the wheel, my hands slippery with sweat. As we pulled out, I glanced in the mirror. The sheriff was standing in the lot, gun still drawn, watching the desert like he expected the man to come back. The road ahead stretched endless, black and empty. We drove for miles without speaking. The radio was off, the only sound the tires humming against the asphalt. I could feel Elaine staring at me, but I didn't meet her eyes. I kept replaying the scene over and over, the shotgun glinting in the neon, the sheriff's voice breaking the silence, the way that man just walked away. Finally, Elaine spoke. "Nick, what if that sheriff wasn't real?" I frowned. "What are you talking about?" She hugged Tommy tighter. What if he was never there? What if we imagined him? I almost laughed, but the thought made my skin crawl. He had looked real. His badge had caught the light. His boots had crunched gravel. But Elaine's words planted a seed of doubt that never left me. We made it to the interstate an hour later and stopped at a well-lit station crowded with truckers. Everything felt normal again. Safe. But when I asked around about Red Mesa Fuel, nobody seemed to know what I was talking about. One trucker squinted at me and said, "That old place?" Been shut down since the 70s. Burned half to the ground. Elaine squeezed my hand so hard it hurt. It's been years now. Tommy's grown, has kids of his own. We've told the story a handful of times, but only to close friends who won't laugh us off. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if Elaine was right. If maybe the sheriff wasn't really there. Maybe he was just some shadow from the past, some protector who stepped in one more time at the crossroads where too many bad things had happened. I don't know if the man with the shotgun was real either, but I know how it felt. Too solid, too raw. The terror in my chest that night was real, and so was the relief when that sheriff appeared. We never went back. And to this day, when I see a lonely neon sign glowing out in the desert, my chest tightens. I grip the wheel a little harder and I keep driving. Because some roads don't just lead you somewhere. They keep a piece of you. Long before that December night in Maplewood, I had already learned what it meant to feel trapped by routine. I was 17, a senior at East Ridge High, and I spent most of my evenings working part-time at Tony's Pizza. It wasn't glamorous. I smelled like pepperoni more often than I cared to admit, and my clothes carried the faint grease of the kitchen. But it gave me spending money and kept me busy. My parents didn't make much. Dad worked maintenance at the hospital. Mom did double shifts as a nurse's aide. So the paycheck meant more than just cash for gas. It helped with groceries, sometimes even bills. The shop sat on the corner of Stillwater Avenue and Birch Street, right across from an auto parts store that always seemed half-lit and abandoned. Tony, my boss, was an old-school guy who believed in long hours and hard work. He had a gruff voice that made everything sound like a complaint, even when he was paying you a compliment. "Kid, you're reliable," he'd say while shoving a delivery ticket into my hands. "Age quit after a month. You're still here. I like that." Most guys, you're that winter break. Maplewood was blanketed in snow that never seemed to stop falling. By late December, the plows couldn't keep up. Streets narrowed into single lanes, cars sat buried, and everything had that muffled quiet only winter storms can bring. I didn't mind at first. I liked the way the town looked under snow. Streetlights glowing orange through the flurries, the lake frozen over, kids dragging sleds down cracked sidewalks. But the novelty wore off once I had to drive in it every night. I'd gotten used to deliveries taking longer. Sometimes customers tipped extra just because I showed up in the storm, but sometimes they didn't. That Wednesday, December 28th, it was particularly bad. The snow fell sideways, wind pushing it in sheets across the road. I'd already been thinking about heading home when Tony came over. "Hey, one more run," he said. "Couple pies out near County Road 23. I frowned. "That's pretty far, isn't it? Roads out there aren't great." He gave me that look, the one that reminded me he'd once run the shop 6 days a week by himself. "You'll be fine. Double tip probably. People way out there don't get many drivers willing to make the trip." The truth was, I wanted the money. College applications were hanging over me, and I'd been squirreling away every extra dollar I could. So I nodded. "All right, I'll take it." I loaded 2 large pepperoni pizzas into the delivery bag, grabbed a soda they'd ordered, and headed out into the storm. My old Honda Civic didn't love snow, but I knew how to handle it, feathering the gas and steering smooth around the corners. By the time I hit the edge of town, the houses had thinned out into patches of woods and farmland. That's when I noticed my gas gauge had dipped lower than I thought, just a quarter tank. Normally it would have been enough, but with the snow slowing me down, I didn't want to risk running dry. I spotted a small station at an intersection I barely recognized. Maplewood Gas. The sign buzzed with failing lights, half the bulbs dead. Only 2 floodlights lit the lot, casting long shadows across the snow. The convenience store looked deserted except for a cashier inside, hunched over the counter, flipping through a magazine. I pulled in, parked at pump 4, and stepped out into the biting wind. My boots crunched through the fresh snow as I slid the nozzle into the tank. That's when I heard it, the soft, deliberate sound of footsteps behind me. At first I figured it was another customer, maybe someone walking from the store or cutting across the lot. But when I turned, the lot was empty. Just snow piled against the store's wall and my own footprints leading back to the car. I looked closer. There was another set of prints, long shoe marks that started near the tree line and ended abruptly a few feet from me. No one stood there now. The hair on the back of my neck rose. "Hello?" My breath puffed in front of me, white against the dark. No answer. Only the sound of the pump chugging fuel. I shook it off, blaming the storm and my imagination. Still, I scanned the lot again before climbing back into the driver's seat. That's when I saw him. A man in heavy winter clothes was crossing the lot slowly, his hood pulled low over his face. His pace wasn't hurried, but it wasn't casual either. Each step looked deliberate, as if he was making sure I saw him. My pulse quickened. I reached across and hit the lock button. The man stopped in front of my car. He stood still, hands flexing at his sides, head tilted slightly forward so his face stayed hidden in the shadow of the hood. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he lunged. His fist slammed against the driver's side window with a crack that rattled the glass. I screamed, fumbling for my phone, my hands slick with sweat despite the cold. He pounded again, harder, and a thin spiderweb crack etched across the corner of the window. "Stop!" My voice was high and panicked. I dialed 911 with trembling fingers. Before the man could hit a third time, the gas station door banged open. The cashier sprinted out shouting, "Hey, leave him alone!" The hooded figure froze. For a heartbeat, I thought he'd turn on the cashier, but then he spun and bolted, his boots kicking up snow as he vanished into the woods. I sat shaking behind the wheel, phone pressed to my ear as the operator answered. 911, what's your emergency? There's a man, he tried to break into my car. He ran into the woods by Maplewood Gas. My voice cracked. Stay in your vehicle, the operator instructed. Officers are on the way. I clutched the phone, eyes locked on the tree line where the man had disappeared, half expecting him to reappear at any second. It took 20 minutes for the squad car to arrive, sirens muted in the snow. By then, my panic had dulled into a numb fear. The pizzas sat forgotten in the back seat, steam fogging the delivery bag. 2 officers stepped out, bundled against the cold. The cashier met them halfway, pointing toward the woods. I rolled my window down an inch when one officer approached. "You the caller?" "Yes, he tried to break my window, just stood there and stared first." The officer nodded, his breath visible. "You said he ran that way?" I pointed. "Yeah, straight into the trees." They searched with flashlights, boots crunching through drifts, but after half an hour they returned shaking their heads. No sign of him, just footprints that stop about 30 yards in. The other officer asked for my information, some drifter. Could be gone already. "We'll file a report, but honestly, son, it might have been..." The words didn't reassure me. Something about the man's deliberate movements made me think this wasn't random. When they checked the delivery slip, things grew stranger. The address I'd been sent to didn't exist. The house number led to an empty lot. When they traced the call, it came from a prepaid burner phone. "You were set up," the officer said simply. I felt cold in a way that had nothing to do with the snow. Someone had wanted me out here, vulnerable. And if the cashier hadn't come out when he did... I didn't finish the thought. Tony was furious when I told him. Say no? A fake order? At that address? Jesus, kid, why didn't you just... I didn't know. I snapped, still shaken. He rubbed his forehead. Out that way. Not worth it. All right, not your fault. But we're not taking any more runs. For days afterward, I kept seeing the man in my head. The way he stood motionless, the sharp crack of his fist against the glass. I avoided night shifts when I could, and when I did work, I carried a pocket knife in my coat, though I wasn't sure I'd have the nerve to use it. Friends brushed it off. Probably some drunk messing with you, one said. But the police finding nothing. The fake order, it gnawed at me. Whoever it was had planned it, and I'd nearly walked right into it. Years have passed since that night, but it still shadows me. I never delivered pizzas again. I finished high school, went to college, moved states. But winter storms still make me uneasy. Quiet gas stations especially. I keep my tank full now. If I have to stop, I keep the engine running, doors locked, eyes on the mirrors. Sometimes, in the corner of my vision, I imagine that hooded figure crossing the lot again. I never found out who he was or what he wanted. Maybe just to scare me. Maybe something worse. But I learned something that night. Safety is fragile, and trust in routine can blind you. The scariest dangers often come not from the supernatural, but from ordinary places where we least expect them. A delivery, a gas stop, a stranger's gaze. What saved me wasn't bravery, but caution, quick thinking, and someone willing to intervene. The lesson I carry is simple but hard-earned. Never ignore your instincts, and never take your safety for granted. I've always thought road trips sound better in theory than they feel in practice. On paper, they're freedom, fast food, playlists, wide open skies. But once you're actually in the car, cramped and running on gas station coffee, reality sets in. By the second day of our cross-country drive in August 2017, I was already wondering if we'd made a mistake. Eric Mills, my college roommate, was the one who convinced me. We'd both landed jobs in Washington, D.C. after graduation. Everyone else was flying out, but Eric wanted the adventure. "It's a once-in-a-lifetime chance," he'd said, grinning as he shoved his duffel into the back of our rental car. "We'll see the country. No better way to start fresh than with a road trip." I'd agreed, mostly because it felt easier than saying no. But by the time we crossed into North Dakota, 2 days of endless highways and cheap motels had drained the excitement out of me. My shoulders ached from driving. Eric's energy was fading, and we were both tired of lukewarm coffee and the smell of fast food bags piling up in the back seat. The dashboard clock read 11:34 p.m. when I noticed the fuel gauge dipping lower than I liked. We were somewhere between Bismarck and Dickinson, nothing but stretches of black highway and fields swallowed by the night. The next real town was still close to an hour away. That's when I saw it. A faint neon glow up ahead. "Gas station," I muttered, more relieved than I expected. Eric sat up, peering through the windshield, in the middle of nowhere. Finally, thought we were about to end up stranded. The exit curved toward a lonely-looking stop called Pine Ridge Gas Service. The sign buzzed weakly, casting pale light across an otherwise empty lot. Only one other vehicle sat there, a dark sedan idling near the side. Its headlights were off, but the engine rumbled, exhaust curling up into the humid summer air. "Why's he just sitting there?" Eric asked under his breath. "Maybe waiting for someone," I said, though I felt the unease tighten in my gut. I pulled up to pump 2 and stepped out. The night was heavy, warm but damp, and the buzzing of the overhead lights filled the silence. I swiped my card, shoved the nozzle into the tank, and tried not to keep staring at the sedan. Its silhouette didn't move, didn't flicker, just sat there like it was part of the station itself. "Let's make it quick," Eric muttered. I nodded, focusing on the numbers climbing on the pump, but I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on us. Inside the store, a tired-looking woman with graying hair barely glanced up from her magazine as we walked in to grab bottled water. Still, when she saw the car outside, her expression shifted. "You boys be careful on the road tonight," she said suddenly, her voice rough but serious. "Strange folks hanging around lately. Lotta." Her words stuck with me. When we stepped back outside, the sedan was still there, headlights dimmed, but angled straight toward our rental. Eric was already tense. "I don't like this, man. Let's just get out of here." "Yeah," I agreed. I shoved the water into the back seat and replaced the nozzle. The pump clicked off and I climbed behind the wheel, trying not to look at the sedan as I started the engine. We rolled out of the lot and back onto the highway. For the first few miles, silence hung between us, broken only by the hum of the tires. I almost started to relax, until Eric leaned forward and whispered, "He's behind us." I checked the mirror. Sure enough, 2 headlights glowed steadily in the darkness, keeping a perfect distance. Not too close, not too far. "It's just coincidence," I muttered, though my voice sounded hollow. Really? Then why hasn't he passed us? Eric's tone was sharp. I tested it. I pressed the gas, watching the speedometer climb. The headlights grew smaller, then surged forward, closing the gap again. My grip on the wheel tightened. Eric cursed under his breath. He's matching you. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, black on black with no other cars in sight. The night pressed in heavy, the fields on either side swallowing any light beyond our beams. I slowed down. The sedan slowed too. My pulse pounded in my ears. This wasn't coincidence. He was following us. Eric leaned toward me. Take the next exit. Try to lose him in town. I spotted a green sign for Dickinson, 5 miles ahead. I flicked the blinker, heart hammering. When we veered off, the sedan stayed glued behind us. The city lights should have brought relief, but they didn't. At every turn, every red light, the sedan lingered. Its headlights burned into our mirrors, unblinking. Eric kept muttering, "This isn't good. This isn't good." By the time we pulled into Dickinson proper, it was nearly midnight. The streets were quiet, most businesses dark except for the occasional diner or all-night gas stop. I was running out of ideas. "Head for the motel," Eric said suddenly, "the one we booked online." Won't he just follow us there? We can't keep circling all night. At least at the motel there'll be people. I took a sharp turn toward the motel, tires squealing. The sedan followed, calm and steady. My skin prickled with sweat despite the cool air conditioning blasting through the vents. We reached the motel lot, a low brick building with a glowing vacancy sign. My first instinct was to park in back, but Eric grabbed my arm. "No, right by the entrance, where people can see." I swung the car up to the lobby doors and braked hard. Both of us jumped out, leaving our bags in the back. The sedan rolled in too, creeping closer. The night clerk inside must have seen the panic on our faces, because she rushed to unlock the doors. Eric yanked them open, pulling me inside just as the sedan stopped near the lobby. A window rolled down. A man's voice called out, low and casual, "Hey, you staying here?" The sound of it chilled me. Too calm, too deliberate. The clerk's voice cut through the glass. "You need to move along or I'm calling the police right now." The man didn't answer. He sat there for a few seconds, engine idling, then slowly pulled away and disappeared back into the night. Neither of us slept much. We stayed in the lobby for nearly an hour, watching through the glass as if he might return. The clerk stayed nearby, arms crossed, shaking her head. "We get creeps sometimes, but that one..." She trailed off. When we finally went to our room, Eric shoved a chair against the door and double-checked the lock 3 times. I lay awake listening to every sound from the parking lot. Every engine that passed made me tense. The next morning, the daylight made everything feel less sinister, but not by much. Our car was untouched, no sign of the sedan. Still, Eric refused to drive until he'd walked the lot twice. Maybe he was just curious, I offered weakly. Eric gave me a look. Curious doesn't follow people 50 miles and into a motel. He was right. Whoever that man was, he hadn't been harmless. We didn't talk much the rest of the drive east. Both of us kept glancing at the mirrors, half expecting those same headlights to appear again. They never did, but the tension didn't fade. Years later, I still think about that night in Dickinson. I've driven long highways and stopped at late-night gas stations since, but I never feel entirely at ease. Sometimes when headlights linger too long behind me, my chest tightens the same way it did on that empty road in North Dakota. Eric and I still bring it up now and then, usually with nervous laughter, but neither of us really jokes about it. There's a weight to that memory, a reminder of how quickly the ordinary can turn threatening. I'll never know what that man wanted. Maybe to scare us, maybe to rob us, maybe something darker we were lucky enough to escape. But I know this. That night changed the way I travel. I no longer brush off bad feelings at gas stations. I keep the engine running, doors locked, and my phone ready. Because danger, doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just follows quietly, mile after mile, waiting for you to ignore the instinct screaming that something isn't right. The world isn't always as safe as we want to believe. Trusting your instincts, those quiet alarms in your gut, can mean the difference between a bad scare and a tragedy. When something feels wrong, it usually is. Listen, act, and protect yourself, because your safety is never worth the risk of politeness or doubt. I've never been a night owl. By the time most people are cracking open their second beer on a Thursday night, I'm usually out cold on the couch. But back in March 2013, I was on a different kind of schedule. I had a warehouse job outside Denver that worked odd shifts, long, back-breaking shifts that sometimes stretched into early morning hours. That Thursday, I clocked out just after 11, sore and drained, but with one thought in my head: get home. Home wasn't Denver. I'd moved out to a small rented place in Buena Vista tucked in the mountains. Beautiful during the day, but at night those mountain roads felt like endless tunnels of black. I knew the drive too well, Highway 285 winding through hills half lit by the moon. Usually I planned ahead so I wouldn't be running low on gas, but that night my brain wasn't firing on all cylinders. By 2 in the morning, I was running on fumes. The little orange fuel light had been glaring at me for 10 miles, and my eyelids felt like weights. The last thing I needed was to get stranded on the side of a freezing mountain road in March. When I spotted a faint neon glow ahead, relief washed over me. It was Silver Creek Gas Mart. The place looked like it hadn't seen renovation since the early 80s. The canopy light above the pumps flickered with a constant buzz, casting a weak glow over the icy lot. Dark forest loomed on 3 sides, pressing in close. It felt like the last scrap of civilization before the wilderness swallowed everything. As I pulled in, my headlights swept across a beat-up sedan parked far in the lot. The windows were fogged. I couldn't tell if anyone was inside, and that unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. Maybe someone was sleeping in there, maybe nobody. Either way, I felt exposed the second I stepped out into the night. The cold cut through my jacket. I shoved the nozzle into the tank, trying not to keep glancing toward that car. It didn't move, didn't even flicker with a sign of life. Still, the hairs on the back of my neck stayed standing straight up. Inside, the store wasn't much better. Harsh fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the tile looked permanently stained. A young cashier with headphones around his neck slouched behind the counter, barely acknowledging me when I asked about coffee. "Yeah, over there," he mumbled, gesturing lazily. As I poured myself a cup, I realized the silence outside was unnerving. Not a single car passed on the highway, just the faint whistle of wind through the trees. I told myself I was being dramatic. Fill up, grab caffeine, keep driving. Simple. Before I left, though, I asked, "Hey, restroom around here?" The cashier didn't even look up. He just reached under the counter and tossed me a heavy wooden block with a rusty key dangling from it. "Out there," he said, pointing toward the side of the building. It should have been nothing. Just a restroom break. But the moment I stepped back into the cold with that key, I had the creeping sense I was walking into something I'd regret. The side door was old and warped, paint peeling, hinges groaning when I stuck the key in. The cold night pressed harder out there, the forest beyond the lot looking blacker than anything I'd ever seen. I swore I could feel eyes on me from somewhere in those trees, or maybe from the sedan still parked at the far end. The door gave with a reluctant creak and the smell hit me first. Bleach, sure, but underneath it, a sour dampness like mildew and stagnant water. A single bulb swung from the ceiling on a wire, throwing dim shadows that shifted with every flicker. The restroom wasn't large, just 2 sinks, a paper towel dispenser hanging crooked, and a row of stalls. My boots echoed against the tile as I stepped in. That's when I froze. At the far end, in the last stall, I saw them, a pair of boots sticking out beneath the door. Muddy, scuffed work boots, the toes pointing perfectly straight. At first, I figured maybe a drifter had crashed there, hiding from the cold. It wasn't unusual in mountain towns. I raised my voice. "Hey, You all right in there? Silence. The bulb flickered once. I took a cautious step closer, the tile squeaking faintly under my weight. Sir? Do you need help? Still nothing, just the faint drip of water from the sink. I was about to leave when I saw it. The left boot shifted, heel scraping softly against the floor before going still again. That single movement snapped every nerve in me awake. Whoever was in there wasn't asleep, they were listening. My pulse hammered in my ears. Something about the stillness, the silence, the way the boots hadn't moved until now. It felt wrong, predatory. I backed up slowly, fumbling for the door handle. The key slipped once in my sweaty grip. That's when it happened. The stall door creaked. Slowly, almost teasingly, it opened a few inches. My breath locked in my throat. Through the narrow crack, I saw a face. Pale, hooded, eyes dark and unblinking, fixed straight on me. There was no confusion or exhaustion in them, just cold awareness. I don't remember making the decision. I just moved. My hands twisted the lock, the door swung open, and I bolted into the freezing night. My heart felt like it was about to punch through my chest. The lot looked emptier than before, if that was even possible. The sedan was still there, fogged windows glowing faintly from my headlights. I didn't look long enough to see if anyone was inside. I sprinted across the icy patch and nearly slipped, fumbling the block of wood still dangling from the key. Inside the store, I slammed the key on the counter, breathing hard. "Restroom," I gasped. "There's someone in your—" The cashier blinked at me, pulling his headphones down. "What?" "The stall, the last stall. There's a guy in there. He was watching me." My words tumbled over themselves. The kid frowned, shaking his head. "Busted." "Nah. Restroom's been locked for weeks. Plumbing's for a moment. I thought I'd misheard him." "What are you talking about? You gave me the key." He reached under the counter and pulled out another key, nearly identical to the one I had just dropped, attached to its own wooden block. "This is the only restroom key we have. Been here since I started this shift." My stomach dropped. I turned toward the door. Then what the hell did I use? We rushed outside together. The side door I'd just run from was hanging wide open, creaking in the wind. I pointed. "There, look." The cashier's face paled. He stepped cautiously inside while I hovered at the threshold. The light bulb was still swinging above, but the stall at the end? Empty. The boots were gone. No footprints on the wet tile. No sign anyone had ever been there. I didn't want to stay. Every instinct screamed at me to get back in my car and put as much distance between myself and Silver Creek as possible. But the cashier insisted on checking the lot with me, maybe to prove I wasn't crazy, maybe to prove he wasn't. We walked past the pumps, our breath fogging in the air. The sedan sat at the far end, just like before. But when we approached, it was empty. No driver, no passenger, no belongings. The windows were still fogged from the inside. "How long has that car been here?" I asked. The cashier shrugged, his voice uneasy now. "Thought maybe someone left it." "Don't know. Was here when I started at 10. The words made my skin crawl. That meant it had been sitting there for hours. We circled back toward the store, both of us jittery. I couldn't shake the image of those boots, the way they'd shifted just enough to let me know the man was awake, the face staring through the crack. Back inside, I grabbed my coffee, but my hands shook so badly I almost dropped it. "Leaving," I told the kid flatly. He didn't argue. Just nodded, eyes darting nervously toward the window that looked out at the side door. When I pulled back onto the highway, I didn't look in the mirrors, didn't glance back at the glowing neon sign of Silver Creek Gas. My chest felt tight all the way home, and every headlight in my rear view made me jump. Years have passed, but I still remember that night in brutal detail. The creak of the restroom door, the way the boots scraped the tile, the pale face watching me. Sometimes I wonder if exhaustion played tricks on me, if the long hours and the late hour warped my senses. But the cold certainty in those eyes, that wasn't my imagination. I've never stopped at Silver Creek Gas again, though I've driven past it countless times. The side door is still there, weathered and crooked. Every time I pass, I half expect to see those boots sticking out from the last stall again, waiting. What haunts me most is the key, that rusty block of wood, real and heavy in my hand. If it wasn't theirs, where did it come from? Who left it? And why did it work? Sometimes when I tell the story, people laugh nervously and say it was probably just a squatter, someone trying to stay warm. But deep down, I know better. That stare wasn't desperation. It was something else entirely. And every so often, when I stop at lonely gas stations late at night, I can feel it again. That sensation of being watched, silently, from just out of sight. Not every danger in life announces itself loudly. Sometimes it waits quietly, patient and deliberate, until you stumble close enough. When instincts tell you something is wrong, you owe it to yourself to listen. Safety doesn't come from being polite or curious, it comes from trusting your gut, stepping away and refusing to ignore the warning signs your mind is screaming. Winter nights in Montana always carried a certain weight to them. The kind of cold that pressed against the glass, crept into your lungs, and made you feel very small under the endless black sky. I'd grown up with it, but it never got easier. That December evening, the 14th of 2017, I was driving east on a back road with my 5-year-old daughter, Clara, tucked in the back seat. We were heading to my in-laws' ranch just outside Billings for a week of Christmas traditions, snowstorms, and family dinners. My husband, Matt, had already gone ahead the night before because his work schedule wouldn't allow us to leave together. He promised the fire would be roaring when we arrived, and Clara was already talking about how she wanted to help her grandma decorate cookies. I was 29, tired from work, and trying to convince myself that the trip wasn't as stressful as it felt. Clara hummed quietly behind me, a jumbled little tune that was half Jingle Bells, half something she'd made up. It was the kind of sound that usually soothed me, but that night, with the black highway stretching empty for miles, it made me feel even more aware of how alone we were. I'd been driving for 3 hours, and the world outside the windshield had turned into one long blur of snowbanks and dark tree lines. Not a single car had passed in either direction for what felt like forever. When the orange glow of my gas light blinked on, my stomach knotted. Out there, with no one around, running out of gas could turn dangerous fast. I tried to remember where the nearest station might be. A place called Cedar Point Gas came to mind. I hadn't been there in years, but I remembered it as a small, rough-looking station near the woods. I told myself not to panic, but as Clara asked from the back, "Mommy, are we almost there?" I knew I had to find fuel soon. By 4:30 p.m., the last traces of daylight were gone. Just when I began to wonder if I'd made a mistake taking the back road, a faint flicker appeared ahead. A neon sign glowing, "Gas open 24 hours," its letters uneven, buzzing faintly against the darkness. Relief washed over me, though unease settled just as quickly. The place looked run down, half forgotten, and the lot was lit by a single flickering street lamp. I pulled in. Clara shivered in the back seat and said softly, "I don't like it here." I wanted to tell her it was fine, but truth was I felt the same. A rusted truck sat near the pumps, hood propped open. At first I thought it was abandoned, but as I slowed I noticed movement inside. 2 men, both staring straight at us. Something in me whispered to keep driving, but the gauge on my dash was already nearly empty, and Clara whispered, "Mom, I really have to go potty." That settled it. Against my instincts, I turned toward the pumps, telling myself it would be quick. The moment I stepped out, the cold bit through my gloves like knives. The night was silent except for the crunch of my boots on the icy ground. From the corner of my eye, I saw the men in the truck still sitting, still staring. I forced myself to focus on the pump, sliding my card. It flashed an error. I tried again, same result. I'd have to go inside. The station's glass door creaked when I pulled it open. Inside, the air smelled of burnt coffee, motor oil, and something faintly metallic. A young man with greasy hair hunched behind the counter, scrolling through his phone. He didn't even look up when I walked in. Clara clutched my hand tighter than usual, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can we be fast, Mommy?" I nodded, forcing a smile, though my chest was already tight. The store felt like it hadn't been cleaned in years. Harsh fluorescent lights flickered above, casting shadows in the corners. A coffee pot sat half empty on a burner that looked like it hadn't been turned off in days. I walked to the counter, cleared my throat, and asked, "Pump 3. It's not taking my card." The young man grunted without lifting his eyes, then said, his voice was flat, dismissive. Clara tugged my sleeve. "Try again. If it don't work, pay cash." "Mommy, bathroom?" The clerk jerked his thumb toward the back hallway, not even glancing at us. I grabbed the heavy restroom key attached to a block of wood from a hook by the counter, muttering, "Thanks," though he didn't respond. We made our way down the dim hallway, its walls covered in peeling paint. Clara's boot squeaked against the tile. When we reached the restroom, the lock stuck before finally clicking open. The smell of bleach mixed with mildew hit me immediately. The stall door wouldn't shut properly, the latch bent out of shape. I tried jiggling it, but it wouldn't catch. "Just stay close to me," I whispered. Clara nodded, her small hands clutching my coat. As she washed up afterward, I heard it. Footsteps outside the door. Slow, heavy, too deliberate. Clara froze, whispering, "Mommy, someone's waiting." I pressed my ear to the door. The steps stopped, then retreated. Silence. My pulse pounded as I quickly ushered Clara out, her eyes wide. Back in the store, the truck's driver and his companion were inside now, standing by the snack aisle. They didn't speak, didn't even pretend to browse properly, just shifted their weight slowly, while keeping their eyes on me. The clerk was still glued to his phone, oblivious. My gut screamed at me to leave. I grabbed Clara's hand tighter and walked briskly to the counter. "Pump 3, fill up," I said, sliding my card across. Finally, the clerk looked up, his expression blank. He swiped the card lazily, then dropped it back in front of me. That's when one of the men muttered, his voice low but clear. "Long way from town. Roads get dangerous out here." He wasn't smiling. It wasn't small talk. It was a statement. I forced a weak smile, nodded without answering, and tugged Clara toward the door. My legs felt heavy, but my chest raced with panic. The moment we stepped outside, I knew things had gotten worse. The truck had been moved. It now sat directly behind my car, blocking the exit. I whispered to Clara, "Quick, get in the car." My voice shook, but I tried to keep it calm. She climbed in, eyes wide, while I fumbled with the keys. My breath came fast as I slid into the driver's seat. The truck loomed in my rear view, its headlights dark, but I could see the silhouettes of the men inside. I turned the key. The engine roared to life. For a brief second, I thought maybe they would just stay put. But then one of them stepped out, walking toward me. His boots crunched on the ice. He carried something in his hand, metallic, glinting in the weak light. He tapped it against my window, a hollow thud that sent Clara screaming. That was enough. My hands gripped the wheel, and I slammed the gas. The car jerked forward. I twisted the wheel hard, tires squealing as I swerved around their truck, clipping the bumper in the process. The impact jolted us, Clara crying out in fear, but we were free, skidding back onto the highway. In my mirror, their headlights flared to life. They pulled out fast, closing the distance. My throat tightened as I pressed harder on the accelerator, the empty road stretching endlessly ahead. Clara sobbed, "Mommy, they're chasing us." Every time I sped up, they did too. My hands shook, the steering wheel slick with sweat despite the freezing air. I tried to steady my voice. "It's okay, baby, just hold on. We'll be fine." But inside, I wasn't sure. The black highway seemed to stretch forever. Every mile felt like 10. My mind raced with desperate thoughts. Should I pull over? Should I call the police? Would they even get here in time? Then, just as my chest felt like it might collapse from the pressure, I saw them. Headlights. A truck coming fast from behind us, but separate from the men's vehicle. Relief surged through me when I recognized the shape. My father-in-law's old pickup. He must have come looking when I hadn't arrived on time. I flashed my brights, desperate for him to see me. The truck behind us slowed instantly, then veered off toward the tree line. Within seconds, their headlights vanished into the woods. I pulled over onto the shoulder, my whole body trembling as tears finally spilled down my cheeks. My father-in-law pulled in behind me, rushing to my door. "What happened? Are you okay? Where's Clara?" "She's here. She's okay," I choked out, hugging her tightly as she clung to me. The gas station. They followed us. They blocked us in. Two men. At his face darkened with anger, but he pulled us both into his truck's warm cab until I could calm down enough to drive again. When we finally reached the ranch, Matt was waiting on the porch, his face pale with worry. After we told him what happened, my father-in-law went straight to his office and pulled up footage from the security camera overlooking the driveway. My stomach dropped when I saw it. 2 nights earlier, the same rusted truck had circled the property. Not once, but twice. He called the sheriff immediately, but the response we got made me sick. The deputy said, "Probably nothing. Maybe some drifters. We'll make a note of drifters don't block women and children at gas stations," my father-in-law snapped. But the line had already gone dead. That night, Clara wouldn't let go of me, even after she fell asleep. Every time the house creaked or the wind howled against the window, I jolted awake, certain I'd see headlights pulling into the driveway. Days passed, but the fear didn't. Even surrounded by family, I couldn't shake the feeling that those men hadn't just been random strangers. The way they stared, the way they positioned their truck, it felt planned. And the fact they'd been near the ranch earlier only deepened the unease. I drove into town a few days later to get groceries, and on the way back I passed Cedar Point Gas again. In daylight, it looked just as run down. The rusted truck gone, the clerk slumped behind the counter as if nothing had ever happened. But the sight of it sent a wave of nausea through me. I couldn't even bring myself to stop. When we left the ranch a week later, Matt drove. I sat in the passenger seat, holding Clara's hand, my eyes scanning every car that passed. I didn't relax until we were back in Billings. Even now, years later, every time I pull into a gas station on a lonely road, I feel that old fear creeping back. Clara is older now, but she remembers too. Sometimes when we stop late at night, she'll whisper, "Mommy, are those bad men coming back?" I always tell her no, but in my heart, I know I can't be certain. When I was 17, the summers felt longer than they do now. I guess that's what happens when you're a teenager. Time feels like it stretches out forever, even though you can't wait to grow up. It was the summer of 2009, and while most of my friends were burning gas money cruising around Tupelo or hanging out at Sonic, I was clocking hours at Henderson's Fuel Mart. It was a small gas station on the edge of town, the kind of place with squeaky screen doors, 2 pumps that clicked off too soon, and coffee that always tasted faintly of motor oil. I didn't take the job because I loved it. I took it because I wanted my first car, and my mom told me flat out that if I wanted wheels, I'd have to pay for them myself. So I worked evenings, 4 to 10 most nights, sometimes later if Mr. Henderson trusted me with closing. It was quiet work, ringing up Marlboros for truckers, selling Cokes to kids with nothing better to do, and trying to keep flies away from the donut case. The station had a rhythm, one I could almost time my life by. The same old man bought lottery tickets every Tuesday. The same church ladies came in for sodas on Friday nights. The same group of high school boys in lifted trucks stopped by for gas before tearing out to the strip. Most of it was routine, safe, predictable. But then there was him. He wasn't part of any rhythm, not part of any routine. He would just appear, almost out of nowhere, usually after the sun dipped low and the bugs started swarming around the canopy lights. Tall, thin, wiry frame, always wearing the same faded green jacket no matter how hot it was outside. He never bought much, just black coffee, no cream, no sugar. He didn't make small talk either. He would stand by the front window, sipping slowly, staring out at the pumps like he was waiting for someone who never came. At first, I thought nothing of it. People are quirky. Maybe he was just lonely. But one night, Kayla, another cashier who worked mornings but sometimes covered for me, pulled me aside. "That guy," she whispered, her eyes flicking toward the door where he stood. "He creeps me out. He doesn't even look at me when I ring him up. But when I leave at night, he's outside, just standing there, watching." I laughed it off at first, thinking she was exaggerating, but I started noticing it myself. He wasn't just a customer. He was waiting for something I couldn't name. And once I noticed him, I couldn't stop noticing. The first time I truly felt unsettled was late in July. The air was heavy, that sticky Mississippi humidity that clings to your skin and makes every breath feel thick. Kayla was counting the register at the end of her shift while I stocked the cooler. She called out to me, her voice tighter than usual. "He's outside," she whispered when I came to the counter. Sure enough, when I peeked through the glass doors, there he was. Not at the pumps, not by the door. Just standing under the truck stop sign, half hidden in the shadows. Not moving. Just watching. "Maybe he's waiting for a ride," I muttered, trying to sound braver than I felt. Kayla shook her head. "He doesn't have a car. He never has a car. Haven't you noticed?" She was right. I hadn't thought about it, but the man always came on foot. No car, no bike. Just showed up, coffee money in hand, then disappeared into the dark. That night, I offered to walk her out to her car. The parking lot felt unusually quiet, even with the hum of cicadas in the trees. Kayla fumbled with her keys, and the man shifted from the shadows, stepping closer. "Evenin'," he said, voice low, almost uneven. Kayla's breath caught. I pulled her closer to the car, whispering, "Just get in, lock the door." She slid inside, but the man stopped just a few feet from her window. He tilted his head, studying us with an expression I still can't describe. Part smile, part something darker. He pressed his palm flat against her glass, slow, deliberate, like he wanted to see if we would flinch. I banged on the hood of her car, shouting at him. He didn't respond. Just stood there for a few more seconds before melting back into the shadows. Kayla was crying as she sped off. I stood there shaking, pretending I was braver than I felt. But inside, my stomach was twisted into knots. After that night, Kayla never worked past 8. She told Mr. Henderson she couldn't do evening shifts anymore, and he shrugged it off. "Kids these days spook too easy," he said. Easy for him to say. He wasn't the one standing behind the counter when the man in the green jacket showed up. I tried to brush it off, telling myself maybe he was harmless, just odd. But then I started noticing his patterns. He didn't just show up randomly, he showed up when we were closing. He hung around just long enough to make sure we knew he was there. And always, he stood where the light didn't quite reach. One night I had to close alone. The sound of the door chime set my nerves on edge, and when I looked up, there he was, jacket zipped despite the 90-degree heat. He walked straight to the coffee pot, filled his cup, and dropped exact change onto the counter without looking at me. Then he took his usual place by the window, sipping slowly. I kept my eyes on the register, pretending not to care. But I could feel his presence like a weight pressing against the glass. When I finally locked up, I peeked outside. He was gone, or at least I thought he was. As I walked to my mom's old sedan, I heard footsteps. Slow, behind me. My chest tightened, but I didn't turn around. I unlocked the car, slid inside, and locked the doors with shaking hands. The footsteps stopped. I looked up. He was standing 2 rows over, under the buzzing light, staring straight at me. It got worse. Not just at work, outside of work too. One Friday night, Kayla called me crying. It was him. "He followed me," she said. "He was in a truck. I know I told her I'd drive over and check, but by the time I got to her street, the truck was gone." She swore up and down it was him, Same wiry frame, same jacket, same stare. A week later, it was my turn. After closing, I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. They stayed with me for 3 straight miles, never passing, never falling back. When I turned into my neighborhood, the headlights slowed, then vanished down a side street. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house sounded like footsteps. Every shadow outside felt like him. I told Mr. Henderson, but he just laughed. Wasn't harmless. It was calculated. Probably some drifter. Harmless. But I knew better. The last time I saw him was in late August. The air was heavy with the smell of rain, and thunder rolled somewhere in the distance. I was closing alone again, and I swore to myself if he came back, I'd say something. And of course, he came back. Coffee, change on the counter, window seat, same as always. When I finally turned the key to lock up, he was gone. Relief washed over me, but it didn't last. As I walked toward my car, lightning flashed, and for a split second, I saw him standing near the edge of the lot, jacket zipped, face turned toward me. I froze. My keys slipped from my hand, clattering on the pavement. Another flash, and he was gone. Just gone. I drove home, shaking. I didn't tell anyone. What was there to tell? That a man in a green jacket haunted the edges of my summer? That his stare followed me long after he disappeared? Kayla quit. I lasted another month before Mr. Henderson let me go, saying business was slow. Part of me was relieved. I never had to see that jacket again. But even now, all these years later, when I stop for gas late at night, I can't help glancing at the shadows near the pumps. Half of me still expects to see him there, waiting, coffee in hand, eyes fixed on me. Looking back, what unsettles me most wasn't the truck that followed, or the hand pressed against Kayla's window, or even the way he appeared and disappeared in the shadows. It was the way adults brushed it off, the way people who should have cared dismissed our fear as nothing. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. When your instincts tell you something's wrong, trust them. Fear isn't weakness. It's warning. And sometimes the scariest danger isn't the man in the jacket. It's convincing yourself he doesn't matter until it's too late. By the time I turned 22, I figured I had life more or less figured out. College wasn't for me, not yet anyway, so I worked odd jobs around Duluth, trying to keep money in my pocket and gas in my car. My folks were proud enough that I wasn't just sitting around, but I could tell they wanted me to aim higher than stocking shelves or sweeping floors. The trouble was, steady work in northern Minnesota wasn't exactly easy to come by unless you had a trade, and I didn't. That's how I ended up working the graveyard shift at Lakeside Fuel Stop. The place was little more than a box of fluorescent lights sitting at the edge of Highway 61, wedged between the frozen edge of Lake Superior and a wall of black woods that looked endless after dark. Mr. Walsh, the owner, hired me on the spot after a short interview where he mostly talked about fishing. He grinned when I asked about the night shift. "Easiest money you'll ever make, kid," he said. "Keep the coffee hot, stock the shelves, clean up a little, and lock the bathroom after midnight. Whole town's asleep by then. You'll be fine." I believed him. The hours were tough at first. Midnight to 6 a.m. leaves you feeling like a ghost even during the day. But the job was as simple as he promised. Some nights only 4 or 5 people came through, mostly truckers stopping for fuel, or the occasional drunk couple grabbing chips on their way home. By 3 in the morning, the world outside would feel abandoned, as though every living soul had left and forgotten about me. At first, I liked the solitude. I'd brew a pot of coffee, stock some shelves, read a little, and watch the minutes drag by. But after a few weeks, that silence started to feel less like peace and more like the world was holding its breath. That's when the nights began to change. The first time I heard it, I thought I was imagining things. A whistle. Not a song exactly, just a tune, faint and steady, drifting in through the glass doors. It was almost 2:30 in the morning, and there were no cars, no people, nothing. Just that soft, eerie whistle keeping its own time in the dark. I stepped outside, expecting maybe a trucker, but the lot was empty. The pump stood quiet, the highway silent. The whistling carried a few seconds longer, then cut off as if someone had seen me searching. I told myself it was the wind, but it didn't sound like wind. The second night it happened, I knew it wasn't my imagination. Same time, 2:30, same tune, low and steady. I froze behind the counter, my ears straining, waiting for it to fade. When it didn't, I found myself stepping outside again, half hoping to see someone, anyone, that could explain it. The lot was empty, highway dark, trees black as pitch. And still, the whistling drifted around me, like someone circling just out of sight. The next morning, I asked Hank, the older guy who worked days, if he'd ever heard anything strange during his shifts. He looked at me for a long moment, then set his coffee down slow. "You heard it too, huh?" he said. "The whistling?" I asked. He nodded, but his eyes stayed fixed on the counter. "Don't pay it no mind. Don't go looking for it either." That was all he'd say. No explanation, no story, just that warning. But ignoring it wasn't easy. I started dreading 2:30 a.m., counting down the minutes until that sound would start. And sure enough, it always came. Not loud, but clear. Not cheerful either. A lonely sound, like someone whistling to keep themselves company in the dark. Then one night, while restocking chips near the front window, I noticed movement by pump 3. A tall, shadowy figure stood under the lights, hands stuffed in its pockets, head tilted toward me. I blinked, and it was gone. Just like that. By then, I was sleeping bad, my nerves frayed from waiting for something I couldn't explain. I'd try to shrug it off, but little things made it worse. The restroom, for example. After midnight, it was supposed to stay locked. Mr. Walsh was firm about that. But around 3 a.m., one night, the bathroom light flicked on by itself. I know because I saw the glow under the door. My stomach knotted. The key was hanging behind the counter where it always was. Still, I heard the sound of the faucet running. I walked over, hands shaking, and unlocked the door. The sink was dripping. The mirror was fogged over like someone had been inside, breathing heavy. On the glass, smeared with wet fingers, were 2 words: "Don't stay." I slammed the door shut and backed away, my chest tight. I didn't sleep at all that day. When I told Mr. Walsh, he just laughed. "Pipes are noisy, you're fine. You've been listening to Hank's ghost stories. Place is old, but I wasn't fine. And I wasn't imagining it." The next few nights, the whistling grew louder, clearer. Not just drifting outside, but moving, circling, pressing closer. Like it knew I was listening. 2 weeks later, it got worse. That night had started like any other. Coffee brewing, cooler humming, me pretending not to stare at the clock. But at 2:30 sharp, the whistling began again. Only this time it didn't stay outside. The automatic door slid open with a hiss, though no one touched it. Cold air rushed in. The sensors beeped like someone had entered, but the lot was empty. Then, clear as day, the whistling came from inside the store, from behind the aisles. I froze. My skin went cold, my breath short. The sound drifted closer, weaving through the shelves, around the end caps. I couldn't take it. I bolted. I ran out the front, fumbling my keys, and sat in my car with the engine running until the first streaks of dawn lit the sky. I didn't dare go back inside. When Hank arrived, I told him everything: the bathroom, the door, the whistling in the aisles. He just nodded slowly like he'd been expecting it. "Kid," he said quietly, "years ago another clerk worked nights here. Young guy like you. They found him in that bathroom one morning, locked from the inside. He never came out alive. Some say he still keeps watch. Make sure nobody else stays too long." I stared at him, waiting for him to laugh. But he didn't. I quit that week. Told Mr. Walsh I couldn't handle the hours. He rolled his eyes, said I was soft, but I didn't care. For a while I tried not to think about it, tried to tell myself it was stress, lack of sleep, tricks of the mind, But every time I drove past Lakeside Fuel Stop, lit up lonely in the dark, I felt that same knot in my stomach. And sometimes, if I cracked my window just a little, I swore I could hear it again. That faint, steady whistle carried on the wind. I never stopped for gas there again, and I never worked another graveyard shift. When the world goes quiet and your gut tells you something is wrong, don't ignore it. People laugh at fear, but fear keeps us alive. Some warnings don't come in words. They come in sounds, in feelings, in the silence that suddenly doesn't feel empty. The danger isn't always what you see. Sometimes it's what you hear when no one should be there at all. I'd been working nights at the Haven Creek Gasco for almost a year. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and gave me something I hadn't had in a long time: quiet. After the divorce, I couldn't stand being in the house anymore. Every corner held an echo of what went wrong. The gas station became my refuge. It smelled like burnt coffee and old rubber, and I liked it that way. Nights on Route 18 were long and still. I'd stand behind the counter, counting the same stack of lottery slips, watching headlights appear and disappear into the black stretch of highway. There was comfort in the routine. Refill the coffee machine at 2, check the coolers at 3, mop the floors before sunrise. The hum of the refrigerators was my lullaby. The customers were predictable too. Truckers who didn't talk much, teenagers sneaking beer, the occasional tired traveler asking for directions. I'd learned to read people fast, who wanted to talk, who didn't, who might cause trouble. That night in November, I was just grateful for the calm. Around 2 in the morning, the security camera above Pump 2 flickered again. It had been doing that for weeks. I made a note to call maintenance in the morning. Then the chime over the door rang. A man stepped inside. He looked ordinary enough. Mid-30s, faded denim jacket, jeans, boots caked with mud. He didn't buy anything, just paced the aisles like he was looking for something he couldn't find. "Everything okay, sir?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He looked up slowly and smiled, but it was the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes. "Yeah," he said softly. "Just passing through." Then he walked out. The chime rang again. I looked through the glass. No car, no footsteps, just the empty lot glowing under the harsh lights. For a second, I thought maybe I'd imagined him, but the door still swayed from where he'd pushed it open. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe he parked down the road. Maybe he just needed to stretch his legs. But I couldn't shake the cold weight settling in my chest. 10 minutes later, the chime rang again. This time he was wearing a dark hoodie and gloves. Same posture, same dragging step, same tilt of the head. My throat went dry. He didn't wander the aisles this time. He walked straight to the counter. "Back again?" I tried to laugh, but it came out thin and shaky. He didn't answer. He set a pack of gum on the counter. Then, from his pocket, he pulled out a small handgun and laid it down beside the gum like it was just another item to scan. My body froze. He slid a crumpled dollar bill across the counter. "Keep the change," he said, voice low and calm. I nodded, hands trembling. "Sure thing." He took the gum, tucked the gun back in his jacket, and walked out without looking at me again. The chime echoed in the silence. I locked the door the second he was gone. My heart was racing. I called the sheriff's office, voice shaking as I explained what happened. The deputy who arrived was young, couldn't have been more than 25. He looked around the store, checked the cameras, and shrugged. "You said he didn't threaten you." "No," I said. But it was him. Twice. Different clothes. Same guy. He replayed the footage, but the image glitched. Static where the man's face should have been. "Maybe the feed's corrupted," the deputy said. "We'll file a report." He left me with a case number and a suggestion to stay alert. That was all. When I got home that morning, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that faint smile. The way his eyes looked past me, like I wasn't even there. A week passed, and nothing happened. Still, I couldn't shake it. I'd flinch whenever the chime rang. I started noticing cars parked too long across the road, headlights that lingered just a little too long before pulling away. I told myself I was being paranoid, but that didn't make it stop. When I asked the sheriff for an update, he said there was no record of anyone matching that description. No prints on the counter, no trace at all. He said maybe the guy was just passing through, maybe just another drifter. I wanted to believe that. But one night I was taking the trash out behind the station when I saw something by the dumpster. Boot prints. Deep ones, pressed into the frost. They weren't mine. They led toward the tree line and vanished into the dark. I stood there for a long time, my breath fogging in the cold air. Inside I checked the clock, 2:13 a.m. The same time he'd first come in. After that, I started keeping the door locked after midnight. Regulars could wave through the glass and I'd buzz them in. I bought a baseball bat and kept it behind the counter. I started sleeping with the lights on at home. The nights dragged on, each one longer than the last. My co-workers joked about me getting jumpy, but they didn't know. They didn't see how the world gets smaller after something like that, how even silence starts to sound dangerous. It was mid-December when he came back. The wind had picked up that night, rattling the glass doors. I was refilling the coffee pot when the chime rang. I didn't even look up at first. Then I heard his voice. "Coffee still the same?" My hands froze. I turned. He stood by the counter, no gun this time, no smile either. Just that same blank stare. "What do you want?" I asked. He looked around slowly. "Did they ever fix your cameras?" I swallowed hard. "You should leave." He nodded slightly. "I will. But you should know. Some people come and go and no one ever really sees them." "Not really." I didn't understand what he meant. I still don't. He walked out before I could say another word. The chime echoed again. I ran to the door, but by the time I looked outside, there was nothing. No car, no footprints in the snow. The next morning, I told the sheriff again. He checked the footage, static, same as before. Only this time the timestamp flickered, 2:13 a.m., then went blank. I quit the job a week later. Couldn't stand the silence anymore. Every creak, every hum of the fridge felt like a warning. I moved 2 towns over, started working days at a hardware store. Still, some nights I wake up at 2:13 a.m., heart pounding, certain I've heard that door chime again. I don't know what he wanted, or if he was even real. Maybe he was just another broken man passing through the same kind of emptiness I was living in. Maybe we were both just ghosts of something we lost. All I know is that after that night, I learned to see people differently. The quiet ones. The ones who stare too long. The ones who never say what they're thinking. You start realizing how thin the line is between ordinary and dangerous. How sometimes they're the same thing. Sometimes evil doesn't roar. It whispers. It walks into your life looking like any other stranger, buys a pack of gum, and leaves you questioning everything you thought was safe. Never ignore the feeling that something isn't right. Your instincts are your first defense, and the cost of silence is often far higher than fear itself. I was 12 the summer Grandma decided she wanted to see America one last time before her eyes went bad. She told my mom it was just a drive, nothing to fuss over. But even then, I could tell it wasn't about sightseeing. Grandma was fighting something quieter. Loneliness, maybe. Or the way age sneaks up and takes pieces of you without asking. Mom didn't want me going. "She drives too fast," she'd said. But Grandma promised she'd bring me back before school started. She said the trip would be our little adventure, and when Grandma used that voice, there was no saying no. We left Missouri just after dawn on a Monday in her old silver Buick. The car smelled like lemon air freshener and fabric softener, the radio playing old country songs that skipped every few miles. I remember watching the horizon shift colors through the windshield. First blue, then gold, then that pale desert white that makes you squint even behind sunglasses. By the third day, the chocolate we'd bought in Oklahoma had melted into a sticky mess, and the car's AC was barely pushing warm air. Grandma still looked determined, her sunglasses low on her nose, her hands steady at 10 and 2. I think she was proving something. To herself, to time, maybe even to me. When the fuel light blinked, we'd just passed a sign that said, "Next services, 47 miles. Grandma sighed, muttering, these endless miles of nothing before spotting a faded sign half buried in weeds. Pine Hollow Gas Dine, 1 mile ahead. The building looked like it had been dropped there decades ago and forgotten. The Gas Dine sign buzzed with half-dead letters, throwing orange light onto cracked pavement. One gas pump stood crooked, and a tumbleweed bumped against it like it was trying to escape. Inside, the air was stale and cold. The walls were lined with faded snack displays and old postcards no one bought anymore. A man stood behind the counter. Pale skin, thinning hair, and eyes that followed us the moment we walked in. His name tag read, Earl. "Evening, ma'am," he said, voice slow and measured, like he was testing each word before letting it go. "Just filling up, hun," Grandma said, polite as always. As she headed for the restroom, I stayed by the candy rack, pretending to read labels. Earl didn't look away from me, not once. He kept wiping the same spot on the counter with a rag that was already spotless. When Grandma came out, she didn't say a word. Just handed me the keys, smiled tight, and said, "Let's go, sweetheart." We didn't talk much for the first few miles after leaving Pine Hollow. The road stretched straight and endless, like the desert didn't know how to curve. I watched Grandma's hands gripping the wheel tighter than usual. Her wedding ring glinted in the dying sunlight, trembling just slightly with every bump in the road. After 20 minutes, I noticed headlights appear in the rearview mirror. A dusty pickup, maybe red or brown. It was hard to tell in the fading light. It stayed behind us, steady, not too close but close enough to make you notice. "Probably another traveler," I said. Grandma didn't answer. The sky was turning violet now, storm clouds building along the horizon. Lightning flickered far away, lighting up the mountains like camera flashes. Grandma pressed harder on the gas pedal. The car behind us did the same. It didn't pass. It didn't fall back. When I looked again, I could make out the shape of the driver, cap pulled low, shoulders still like a shadow carved out of the dim. As the sun dropped, so did the temperature. The desert turned to ink. Only our headlights and his cut through the dark. "Maybe he's headed to the next town," I whispered. Grandma's voice was tight. "Then he can pass us." He didn't. For the next hour we drove in silence. Every time we slowed for a turn, so did he. Every time we sped up, he matched us. Grandma didn't say anything else, but her jaw was set, and the lines around her mouth looked deeper than I'd ever seen them. When we hit a stretch of open road, she pulled over suddenly like she'd made up her mind about something. "If he's just driving, he'll pass," she said. But he didn't pass. He stopped too, right behind us. Her hand shot to the gear shift. "Hold on." The tires kicked up a wave of dust as we sped forward, the engine groaning. I turned back. The truck's headlights flashed once, then followed again. Hours passed. The radio went silent when we lost the signal, leaving only the sound of wind and gravel under the tires. The world outside felt endless. No houses, no towns, no light except his. Every so often the headlights disappeared, and I'd start to hope he'd turned off somewhere. But minutes later they'd return, closer each time. Around midnight, Grandma said quietly, "We're not stopping again, no matter what." Her voice shook just enough for me to notice. I nodded. "Okay." I tried to stay brave, but my stomach hurt from holding my breath. I kept turning around, half expecting to see his face through the glare. But all I ever saw was that steady glow. By 2 a.m., the gas gauge hovered near empty, Grandma's face was pale, the map folded uselessly on the dash. "We'll make Ridge City," she whispered. "We'll make it." When the lights vanished for the last time around 4, she didn't slow down. She just kept driving, eyes locked forward. "Don't look back," she said. "We're almost there." But I did. I looked anyway, and for a split second before the road curved, I saw a dark shape parked on the shoulder, motionless, like it was waiting. We reached Ridge City just after sunrise. The streets were quiet, the air cool and damp from the night storm. Grandma didn't even pull into a gas station. She drove straight to the police station, stopping so suddenly the tires squealed. A young officer came out, startled. "Ma'am, you okay?" She stepped out slowly, her hands trembling. "Someone's been following us since Flagstaff," she said. The officer nodded, motioning another cop over. They searched the highway for hours. Nothing. No truck, no driver, no sign anyone had followed us. When we gave the description, I mentioned the man's red cap. The officer's expression shifted. "You sure about that?" "Yeah," I said. And his name tag said Earl. He looked at Grandma, then back at me. "Ma'am, Pine Hollow's been closed for 6 years, burned down after a grease fire." Grandma just stared at him. "We were there last night." He shook his head. "Couldn't have been." Grandma never drove again after that trip. She sold the Buick and started taking buses everywhere. When people asked, she said her eyes had finally given out. But I knew it wasn't her vision that changed. It was something deeper. I'm older now, with a daughter of my own. Sometimes when I drive through small towns at night, I catch myself glancing at the rearview mirror. Part of me expects to see those same headlights again, steady and patient, waiting for me to stop. Maybe it was just a man who didn't know how close he came to terrifying a family. Maybe it was something else entirely, a memory that refused to fade. Either way, that summer changed me. It taught me that some fears don't live on the road. They live inside the people who survive it. Fear isn't always loud. It's often quiet, steady, and patient, like headlights that never pass. Trust your instincts. When something feels wrong, it probably is. And sometimes, survival isn't about fighting. It's about listening to the small voice inside that says, "Keep driving." I was never a fan of long drives at night, especially after Halloween parties. The roads feel emptier, the darkness heavier. That night, I'd left my cousin's place in Shelbyville later than I should have. Too much caffeine, not enough food, and 3 hours of Tennessee backroads ahead of me. My phone battery hovered at 8% and the gas gauge had dipped below a quarter tank. I told myself I'd make one more stop before hitting the interstate. I remember the fog rolling in as I turned off the main highway, dense and low like smoke curling over the asphalt, the kind of fog that swallows headlights whole. That's when I saw the sign. Hollow Creek Gas Market. The flickering letters appeared out of the mist like a mirage. The place looked old but open, light spilling from the windows, the faint buzz of a neon beer sign glowing red against the fog. I slowed, turned in, and rolled up beside the only working pump. Inside, the air smelled of coffee, dust, and rain-soaked pavement. A TV on the counter hissed with static, showing half of a football game that had probably ended hours ago. The man behind the counter looked up and nodded. "Storm's getting bad out there, son," he said. "Be careful on 49 tonight. Roads close sometimes without warning." He had one of those soft southern drawls that made warnings sound like advice. I smiled politely, paid for gas, and grabbed a cup of coffee that tasted like burnt rubber. As I walked back to my car, he called out, "Keep your lights low in that fog. You'll see more than you want to." I laughed nervously, waved, and got in. The words stuck with me longer than I like to admit. The GPS chimed just as I started the engine. "Road ahead closed, take alternate route." I frowned. The map redrew itself, highlighting a smaller road that veered off through the woods. I didn't think twice. It was late, I was tired, and I just wanted to get home. The road started smooth but quickly turned narrow and cracked, swallowed by trees on both sides. My headlights hit patches of mist so thick it looked like driving through milk. 15 minutes passed before I realized I hadn't seen a single car. No houses, no signs, no sound but the hum of the tires and my heartbeat. Then I saw them, figures along the tree line. At first I thought they were scarecrows, but as I crept forward the shape shifted, human, motionless, facing the road. My high beams caught flashes of white. Masks, clown masks, 10, maybe more, spaced out like they'd been waiting. My foot froze on the brake. I told myself it had to be a prank, teenagers screwing with late-night drivers. But something about how still they were made my throat go dry. "Not funny," I whispered, even though they couldn't hear me. Then one moved. A man stepped forward, holding a wooden bat over his shoulder. Another started walking too. The rest followed, slow and deliberate. My pulse spiked. I slammed the car into reverse. Gravel spat from the tires. The figures broke into a run. One slapped the back window, hard. The sound echoed through the car like a gunshot. I hit the gas, spinning back toward the main road, fog swallowing the shapes behind me. I didn't breathe for a full minute after the road straightened. My hands were shaking so badly the wheel felt slick. The fog thinned, and I expected to see flashing police lights, maybe a roadblock, the closed section the GPS warned about. But the road was wide open. No cones, no signs, no cars. I checked the GPS again. It said I was back on Highway 49. The detour road I'd just come from didn't even appear on the map anymore. When I finally saw the glowing sign for Indre Maple Ridge gas station, I pulled in and parked too fast. The attendant, a young guy with shaggy hair, looked up from his phone as I stumbled inside. "You okay, man?" he asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I tried to explain. The fog, the detour, the people in masks. My words tumbled over each other. He frowned. "You said Hollow Creek Gas Market?" "Yeah," I said. "You know it?" He blinked. "Buddy, that place burned down 5 years ago. Electrical fire. Whole building's gone. There's nothing out there but a signpost." I stared at him, shaking my head. "No, it's still there. I just bought gas." His expression shifted from curiosity to concern. "You sure you're not mixed up? Maybe you stopped somewhere else?" I didn't answer. My hands were still trembling. I didn't sleep when I got home. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the clowns' faces. By dawn, I'd convinced myself it had to be exhaustion, or a Halloween prank, or both. Still, something wouldn't sit right. My gas tank, when I checked it in the daylight, was still nearly empty. The receipt I thought I'd taken from the counter wasn't in my pocket. That afternoon, I drove back toward County Road 49. The fog had lifted, the sun bright enough to sting my eyes. The road looked different in daylight, less mysterious, more broken down. When I reached the spot where the gas station had been, I saw nothing but a charred foundation and weeds growing through the concrete. An old metal sign leaned against a post, the words barely legible. Hollow Creek Gas Market. No pumps, no lights, no building, just ruin. I got out, the gravel crunching under my shoes. A faint smell of burned wood still lingered, years later. I knelt by the ashes, running my fingers over the ground, searching for anything, something to prove I hadn't imagined it. But there was nothing. Then I noticed tire tracks leading off the side road, fresh and deep, cutting toward the trees. Maybe from my car, maybe not. I followed them for a few yards before they disappeared into the brush. For the first time, it hit me how lucky I'd been that night. If I'd stopped, rolled down the window, gotten out, it could have gone bad. Very bad. A week later, a local deputy called me back after I'd reported the masked men near Hollow Creek. "Son," he said, "you're not the first one to say something about that area. Teens pull stunts out there every Halloween. Couple of years back, a driver nearly crashed when someone jumped in front of his car wearing a clown mask." "So it was a prank?" I asked. "Probably. We found empty beer cans and cheap masks in the woods last year. They like to scare people. You were just unlucky enough to find them." He paused. "But I'll tell you this. Don't drive alone through those back roads after dark. Nothing good ever happens past midnight." I thanked him and hung up, relief washing through me. But not completely. Because even knowing it was just people didn't erase the memory of that cold hand slapping my window. It didn't make the fear less real. Sometimes when I drive at night, I still think about the man behind the counter. Maybe he was real, maybe not. Maybe my mind filled in the blanks when exhaustion blurred the lines. What mattered wasn't whether the gas station existed. It was how easily fear turned shadows into monsters, and how close I came to letting panic steer the wheel. I never meant to come back to Astoria. After high school, I'd promised myself I'd leave the gray drizzle behind, the smell of wet wood and salt water, the endless sound of waves against the shore. Life, as usual, had other plans. College loans, rent that ate half my paycheck, and a family who kept pulling strings had me driving north on Highway 101. Back toward the coast, I thought I'd escaped. The Harbor Light Gas Grocery was a small, weather-beaten building perched on the edge of the docks where the wind brought waves of mist straight off the Pacific. Its neon sign flickered like a heartbeat, advertising open 24 hours to anyone who cared to notice. I had agreed to cover a co-worker's holiday shift. Christmas had passed the night before, leaving a quiet that pressed into my chest like a vice. My mom had called that evening. "Don't stay up too late," she'd said, worry threading her voice. "I'll be fine, Mom. It's just one night," I told her, though I didn't believe it. The store smelled of canned soup and cheap coffee. I restocked shelves, wiped counters, and listened to the hum of the soda machine. The windows fogged with my breath, and every time I glanced outside, I half expected the storm clouds and mist to form shapes I didn't want to see. I had learned long ago that quiet nights in small towns could hide more than you realized. Around midnight, I noticed him for the first time. A man standing under the yellow streetlight outside, motionless, head tilted slightly toward the glass. At first, I thought he was just waiting for a friend, or maybe a drunk staggering along the docks. But the way he held himself, completely still, completely observing, made my skin prickle. I opened the door to ask if he needed help. "Sir, are you okay?" No response. He stepped out of the light and vanished into the fog. I shook my head, blaming it on tired eyes and the storm. But deep down, something told me to watch. The wind pushed in damp waves, carrying the faint scent of fish and rain-soaked earth. Every instinct screamed at me that this night wouldn't be normal. A few minutes later, the door chime rang. I looked up. He had entered. Wet boots squeaking across the tile, flannel soaked through, eyes hollow. "Evening," I said softly, forcing calm into my voice. He didn't respond, just wandered the aisles, dragging his fingers along the shelves. I could feel my pulse in my throat. When he knocked over a stack of chip boxes and let out a high, wrong laugh, my stomach twisted. Something was very, very wrong. I took a slow step back toward the door, hoping he hadn't noticed me. "Sir, you can't do that," I said, trying to sound steady. "You okay?" He crouched behind aisle 3, giggling again, almost childlike but not innocent. My throat tightened. That's when I saw it. His hand holding something small, silver, sharp, a knife. Adrenaline hit me like a freight train. I bolted outside, fumbling for my keys, rain smearing my vision. My fingers shook as I locked myself in my car and called 911. Through the windshield, I could see his shadow moving inside, darting between aisles like a predator. Minutes felt like hours. The storm pressed down around me, wind pushing the mist into the edges of my vision. I watched as police cars arrived, lights spinning red and blue in the fog. Officers swept the store, found nothing. The back door to the docks was open, flapping in the wind. He was gone. 2 officers showed me the security footage. My stomach sank. The man had entered through the side door long before I saw him. He had been hiding behind shelves, crouching low, watching me the whole time. "You're lucky, kid," one officer said quietly, voice low, eyes on the screen. He had the knife the whole time. I couldn't speak. The footage confirmed it. I had been walking around oblivious to the danger inches from me. The mist outside pressed against the glass like the world itself was holding its breath. When I got home at dawn, I sat in my car for 10 minutes, still hearing the faint echo of his giggle in my head. I didn't sleep that morning. I couldn't. Driving along the coast, the mist clinging to the windshield, I couldn't help but remember why I hated nights like these. When I was 10, my father had disappeared in a storm. Not out here on the docks, but in the woods behind our old house. His truck was found crushed under a fallen tree. The memory of that night had always lurked in the background, dormant but awake whenever thunder rolled. Now, 20 years later, it felt alive again. I thought about the man in the store, the pacing, the giggling, the knife. There was something familiar in the way he moved, something that felt predatory and lost at the same time. I realized I had been lucky. Pure luck. I couldn't stop thinking about what could have happened if I'd been slower, less alert. The mist outside my apartment window seemed thicker than usual that night, curling around the edges of the glass like fingers reaching for me. Police kept the back door sealed after my report. Officers patrolled the docks, interviewed dock workers, and checked the surrounding streets. No one reported seeing a man matching the description, and nothing was found in nearby alleys or warehouses. But I couldn't let it go. The thought that someone had been in the store, knife in hand, watching me for minutes, possibly longer, made my chest tight every time I closed my eyes. I visited the store again in daylight, walking through the aisles. Everything was as it had been. No sign of forced entry, no discarded items, just the faint scent of wet flannel and fear lingering in the air. I knew the man had been there. I could feel it. The officers assured me that he probably had fled to the fog, to the open docks, to wherever criminals vanish in coastal towns. But instinct told me he hadn't left. Not entirely. Shadows like that don't disappear. They wait. Months later, I returned to the gas station during a daylight run. The storm clouds had lifted, replaced by a low gray sun reflecting off the wet asphalt. Inside, everything looked normal, but I couldn't shake the memory. Crouching behind aisle 3, his hollow eyes, the knife glinting in fluorescent light. Every time I drive past that station, I feel a pull to look inside. I see the faint outline crouched low behind the shelves, waiting for someone to notice. It's a reminder. Danger is often silent, invisible until it's too late. I learned something that night. Instincts matter. Fear isn't weakness. Fear is a signal. That night could have ended differently if I had ignored the warning signs. I don't know if he ever returned after that foggy December night. Maybe he did. Maybe he waits in other small towns, invisible to the world but very present to someone who isn't paying attention. I never thought I'd end up back in Helena, Montana, of all places. Growing up in this state, I always swore I'd leave the small towns behind, the endless stretches of road, the forests that seemed too thick, too quiet. But life has a funny way of reminding you that the past never really lets go. Rent in Billings had doubled, and my old sister had twisted my arm into covering an overnight shift at the Silver Cross fuel stop, miles out of town along Route 93. She joked it would be fun, said the isolation would do me good. I didn't tell her that storms made my chest tighten and my throat go dry, that the sound of rain against metal roofs had haunted me since I was 10. That night, the storm rolled in like a freight train. I pulled up to the station, headlights cutting through sheets of rain that hammered the glass, wind bending the sign like it wanted to snap it clean off its pole. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed. The smell of coffee lingered, stale but comforting. I took a deep breath, pushed my jacket off, and tried to act normal. It had been years since I'd worked a graveyard shift. Months, really. My usual life was safer. Office cubicles, fluorescent light that didn't flicker, streets that never went silent at 2 a.m. But here I was, alone in a gas station surrounded by endless black forests and a storm that seemed intent on tearing the world apart. I called my sister before my shift started just to hear a familiar voice. "I'll be fine," I said. "It's just rain." She laughed, the way only she could, warm and teasing. "You sound like Mom when she pretends she's not scared." I smiled, but the memory of my father's last night lingered at the edge of my thoughts. The truck found crushed beneath a fallen pine, the cold smell of metal and mud, the hollow look on my mother's face. I set up the station, wiped counters, filled the coffee machine, checked the pumps. Hours passed with only the hum of fluorescent light and the rhythmic pounding of the rain. Midnight came and went, and then I saw him. A tall man pacing near the diesel pumps, no umbrella, no car, just long, slow circles in the pouring rain. My gut clenched. Something about the way he moved, mechanical, deliberate, made the hairs on my arms stand straight. "Sir, you okay out there?" I called through the glass. The rain pelted my voice back at me. He didn't answer, just kept pacing. Lightning flashed, revealing the sharp angles of his face for a fraction of a second, then gone again, swallowed by the storm. I tried to shake the feeling, telling myself it was someone stranded, just a drunk or a lost traveler. But the instinct in my chest said otherwise. Don't let him in. Hours passed. I cleaned the floor, made coffee, tried to ignore the storm pounding the roof. Then the doors rattled violently. Bang, bang, bang. And my heart jumped so hard I dropped the cup, shattering it on the tile. The man was there, soaked to the bone, eyes hollow. "Please," he said, "let me in." I hesitated. The smell of wet earth and something metallic hit me as he stepped closer. His hands were bleeding, knuckles raw. "You need help?" I asked softly. "Don't call anyone," he snapped, voice low and urgent. I froze, fingers inches from the phone. The storm didn't ease. We sat in silence, the wind screaming outside, my heart thumping in my ears. Then, just as suddenly, he unlocked the door and left, disappearing into the rain like a ghost. By morning, the storm had moved east, leaving the station dripping and quiet. I told the sheriff about the encounter. He raised an eyebrow, asked the usual questions, and left with a polite nod. The cameras showed me talking, my hand on the door, staring into the storm, but the man was invisible. I tried to shake it off, but the unease clung like humidity on my skin. 2 days later, a report came over the radio. A woman missing from a town 30 miles north, last seen arguing with her boyfriend in the storm. Her car had been abandoned near our station, the passenger seat soaked with blood. I drove there after my shift, parked a safe distance away. The car sat there like a dark monument to something terrible. I could see the police had already combed the area, but the sense of unease didn't leave me. My father's memory flickered in my mind again. The night he disappeared, the silence that followed, the absolute wrongness of being alone when danger strikes. Back at the station that night, the storm returned with a vengeance. The same slow rhythm outside the glass, the dripping sound. I flicked on all the lights, checked the locks, and tried to convince myself it was my imagination. Hours passed. Nothing. But when I finally allowed myself to rest behind the counter, I heard it. Footsteps pacing, slow and deliberate. I grabbed a baseball bat from under the counter, heart hammering. The storm rattled the roof, lightning illuminating the pumps in violent staccato bursts. And then he appeared again, just as before. Drenched, silent, pacing. "Who are you?" I demanded, voice steadier than I felt. No answer, just the wet echo of his steps on the concrete. When morning came, I realized I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something about him wasn't human, or maybe it was, but it was broken, dangerous, and tied to something I couldn't yet understand. I called my sister, trying to explain the encounter. She laughed nervously at first until I described the pacing, the hollow eyes, the blood. "You need to be careful," she said. "Trust your instincts, don't let him in." I couldn't shake the feeling that the storm had summoned more than rain. It had called up memories, fears, and shadows from my past. My father's death, my mother's trembling voice, My own nights lying awake listening for footsteps. I'd thought those things were buried. But now, in the storm, they felt alive again. That night, I stayed in the back office. Doors locked, blinds drawn. Every lightning flash made me flinch. Hours dragged. The clock ticked slowly. Then, faintly at first, I heard it. A metallic tapping, a rhythm that didn't match the storm. I froze, listening. The man stepped inside. Same pacing, same bloodied knuckles. "Why are you following me?" I asked. He didn't answer. Just turned his head slightly, hollow eyes meeting mine. I could feel the intensity of him, the weight of some unspoken rage or grief pressing against the small, fluorescent-lit room. I realized then he wasn't trying to hurt me. Not yet. But he was unbalanced. Lost, like someone carrying the weight of the world on wet shoulders. I could see the outline of a story in his movements, a broken life that collided with mine by chance, in a storm. Hours later, he left as silently as he came. I knew I'd be waiting for him again, heart hammering, hands shaking. 2 days later, the woman's body was discovered in the woods near Route 93. Police said it was murder. My stomach turned. I'd seen her car, her blood. I remembered the pacing man, the storm, the hollow eyes. I took a walk that night, flashlight in hand, along the dark edges of the forest near the station. Rain had soaked the earth again. The wind pushed my hair into my face and I could hear the faint rhythm of footsteps. I thought about calling for backup, for someone official, but I knew if I did, he would vanish before they arrived. And then I saw it. A shoe print in the mud, too large, too deliberate. I followed it a short distance, heart racing. Then the sound, pacing, slow, deliberate, right behind me. "Stop following me," I called. No answer, just the echo of wet footsteps. I sprinted back to the station, locked all doors, and called 911. For the first time that night, I didn't feel powerless. I had evidence. The storm was still raging, but I felt some strange sense of agency. The police arrived hours later, combing the station and the nearby forest. The man had vanished again, leaving no trace. His presence felt like a shadow that only I could perceive. I stayed awake until dawn, listening, watching, heart pounding. After that night, I stayed on the graveyard shift as little as possible. I moved to a different station months later, closer to town, where the storms weren't so isolating. And though I never saw him again, I learned something important. Sometimes danger is real. Sometimes fear is justified. And sometimes the human mind will replay memories, blending past and present, creating ghosts that force you to pay attention. Trusting your instincts isn't paranoia. It's survival. Trust your instincts, respect your own fears, and never dismiss the quiet warnings that something feels wrong. Your awareness can be the difference between safety and disaster. I never thought I'd feel fear so sharp and immediate. It's different from nervousness or the low hum of anxiety that accompanies working the auto shop alone. Fear hits the chest first, then the stomach, and spreads until it makes your hands shake and your mind frantically search for logic that isn't there. That morning, driving along Highway 70 toward Quincy, I felt that exact fear coiling inside me. Cole Harper rode shotgun, quiet except for the occasional cough and the shifting of his backpack. I kept glancing at the dashboard, trying to ignore the black sedan parked at the small, abandoned gas station a few miles back. Something about the way the driver watched us had set off a primal warning I couldn't shake. At the time, I had dismissed it. Too much coffee, too little sleep, paranoia from living alone after Dad passed. But now, as the first faint orange smear of sun cut across the horizon, my skin prickled at every shadow. Mara's voice echoed in my head. "Ethan, don't get into trouble, please. Just call the police if something feels wrong." I had promised her I'd check on Mr. Donovan, our boss, who lived alone in a Victorian house at the edge of town. He hadn't answered calls in 2 days. Normally he was surly but punctual. This silence was unlike him. "Ethan, we shouldn't..." Cole's voice was a low murmur. breaking the silence. I know, I whispered, clutching the steering wheel tighter. But I have to check. Just a quick look. Cole's eyes flicked toward the road. We stay together. Slow. Keep your hands visible. I nodded, camera dangling around my neck like a shield, a ridiculous habit I'd picked up in high school. Photography had been my escape, a way to frame the world in something controllable. Today, it felt useless. Nothing could frame what I feared might be waiting at Donovan's house. The road narrowed as we approached the Victorian. The front gate creaked in the wind. The brass key on the old door jiggled in its lock. The door was ajar. I swallowed hard, stepping out. The air smelled of dew, gasoline, and something darker I couldn't identify. Cole's hand hovered near the concealed gun under his jacket. I tried to steady my breathing, reminded myself that Donovan was just a human, capable of being late, of oversleeping, or sick. Logic. But my chest still twisted. A shiver ran down my spine as the wind pushed the old wooden gate, echoing like distant footsteps. I forced myself to knock, then pushed the door slightly. Inside, the smell hit me first. Metallic, sharp and unmistakable. My stomach dropped. Cole gagged behind me, stepping back. I froze, unable to move, unable to look away. The kitchen was flooded with morning light, or what little seeped through the stained glass. Donovan's body lay sprawled across the floor, blood pooling around him. Time stopped. My mind tried to protest. He's not really. He is. Cole muttered. Oh God, as if saying it would make the reality vanish. I crouched near the doorway, stomach churning, trying to find something familiar. Donovan's favorite coffee mug sat cracked on the counter, a teaspoon submerged in the coffee still half filled. I could almost hear his gruff voice telling me to stop gawking, but this time there was only silence. Ethan. Cole's voice was tight, shaking. We need to call the police. I nodded, fumbling for my phone. My hands were trembling so badly the camera strap caught on my wrist. Memories of the gas station flashed. The black sedan, the attendant's eyes lingering on us, the uneasy feeling that someone had been watching. Could it have been the same people? Had they followed us here? We backed out slowly, closing the door behind us. The air outside felt cleaner, but nothing could remove the coppery smell lingering in my nostrils. The world seemed smaller, more dangerous, like the house had shrunk into a trap I had almost stepped into blindly. When the police arrived, they swept the area. Evidence confirmed that 2 local drug addicts had broken into Donovan's house, hoping to find money or valuables. They'd tortured him for information he didn't have. I kept replaying the gas station moment, wondering if the black sedan had been them scouting the area. The thought made my stomach knot tighter than before. I couldn't stop thinking about that gas station. Months earlier, it had seemed unremarkable. Just a lonely roadside stop with rusty pumps and a flickering neon sign. But now, in hindsight, I could see the warning signs I'd ignored. The attendant's gaze lingering too long. The black sedan parked too close to the pumps. The way the wind had carried a faint metallic smell across the asphalt. That night my mind had dismissed it as paranoia, the result of losing Dad, working too many late shifts, and the isolation that comes with small-town life. But I realized now that danger doesn't announce itself. It waits, sometimes in mundane places, until it finds its opening. I started driving past that route often, studying the highways, checking the small towns for anything out of place. I imagined the black sedan creeping through the fog, the same shadowy figures blending into ordinary nights, waiting for someone vulnerable. Every gas station, every empty lot, became a reminder of vulnerability. Cole noticed the change immediately. "You don't even sleep properly," he said one afternoon as we loaded a car for work. I nodded silently. No one could understand the way my chest tightened at neon signs or empty highway intersections anymore. Weeks passed, but I couldn't shake the morning of Donovan's murder. I replayed it endlessly. The cold metal of Cole's gun, the smell of gasoline and blood mingling, the helplessness on Cole's face as we backed out of the house. I thought of Mara, her voice trembling with worry, and I realized fear had found a permanent place in me. The black sedan remained in my memory, always just at the edge of perception. Driving past Highway 70, the silhouette would appear in my peripheral vision, parked silently, empty. The mind can play tricks, I told myself, but instinct is rarely wrong. I tried photography again, but even behind the camera, every shadow felt like eyes. Every reflection felt like someone watching. My escape was no longer frames on a screen. Fear had embedded itself in the mundane. Months later, I returned to Highway 70, driving past the old gas station. The neon sign was gone, replaced by a small market. The pumps rusted further. I slowed, eyes scanning, heart hammering. Nothing. But I knew it wasn't gone. Evil doesn't vanish. It hides in everyday places, disguised as normal, until someone lets their guard down. Mara noticed the change immediately when I got home. "You're different," she said, voice shaking. "You don't sleep, you flinch at nothing." I nodded. She was right. I had learned something crucial. Danger is real. Fear is real. But surviving it depends on listening to instincts, respecting warnings, and never underestimating the ordinary-looking threat. I still work along the highways, still take photographs, but I never ignore that small voice that says, "Watch, observe, be careful." Survival is about seeing the invisible, even when the world wants to convince you it isn't there. True danger often hides in ordinary places. Trust your instincts, respect your fears, and never dismiss the small signs of something wrong. Awareness can be the difference between life and death. I never liked driving alone on foggy nights. There's a way mist creeps over the asphalt, turning ordinary road lines into faint whispers that vanish and reappear, like the world itself is uncertain. Tonight, the Sierra Nevada foothills were shrouded in heavy fog, orange streetlights casting dim halos onto the slick pavement. Mark, my husband, was behind the wheel, his hands tight on the steering wheel, his jaw set in that protective line he always gets when something feels off. We were heading to a small 24-hour gas station about a mile ahead, a familiar stop on our trips to Yosemite. It was a place that usually smelled of gasoline and stale coffee, but tonight, the fog made it look almost otherworldly, isolated and vulnerable. The headlights caught movement on the roadside, a dark shape that barely shifted. "Mark, is that a bag?" I whispered, leaning forward. He slowed the car. "Looks like trash, but we can check. Better safe than sorry," he said, his voice calm but tight. I glanced at him, remembering the argument we'd had 2 nights ago. My solo travel assignments had been a point of tension. Mark worried. I insisted that my independence mattered. I can't ignore someone," I said then, voice trembling. He had sighed, tension in his jaw. "Fine, just don't do anything reckless, Lydia." Replaying that conversation, I felt my stomach knot. There was nothing reckless about stopping for someone in trouble. My moral compass, that drive to help, overruled caution. But fear tightened around me anyway. As we turned the car around, the shape resolved into a woman sitting on the foggy roadside, thin, shivering, drenched and small against the vast darkness. Her clothes clung to her, soaking wet. I rolled down the window, the cold fog brushing my cheek. "Are you okay?" I called softly. Her eyes flicked up at us, wide, fearful and desperate. I was supposed to meet my mother, at the gas station ahead. I can't make it," she murmured, voice hoarse. Mark glanced at me. The gas station now loomed in the fog, a lonely yellow beacon. We both felt the tension, the sense of sanctuary mixed with vulnerability. "We can take you there," Mark offered. She hesitated, eyes darting toward the fog-enshrouded pines. Then she nodded, gripping my arm. I need to get there," she whispered. We pulled her into the back seat. The car smelled of damp jackets and fear. She spoke in fragments, a violent ex-husband, threats, nights spent hiding in abandoned motels. Every creak of the seat, every truck passing on the highway seemed to amplify her anxiety, and ours. By the time the gas station neon appeared through the mist, the tension was unbearable. We parked, staying in the car as she scanned the parking lot, waiting for her mother. Even under the flickering lights, her wide, fearful eyes haunted me. The neon flickered again, buzzing faintly in the silence. I kept my hands in my lap, Mark's quiet presence beside me grounding me. The woman's breathing was shallow, hands clenching her knees. Every shadow in the parking lot seemed like a threat. I tried to distract her. "We'll wait here. Your mom will come soon." She shook her head, murmuring, I don't want him to find me. He's always looking." I swallowed, feeling a chill that wasn't from the fog. "Who?" I asked gently. "My ex. He hurts people," she said, voice barely audible. Her trembling intensified, and I realized how vulnerable she truly was. Mark shifted in the seat, keeping his eyes on the surrounding darkness, protective and alert. Time stretched. A few cars passed, but the lot remained mostly empty. I noticed the pines surrounding the station, dense, dark, like silent watchers. Every crunch of leaves in the distance made me jump slightly. The fog seemed to move, hiding shapes that might or might not be real. I asked her, "Has he ever hurt you directly?" She flinched, shaking her head. "Not yet, but he's dangerous. Always finds me if I let my guard down. That's why I ran. I couldn't call anyone. Phones, they track you." Mark and I exchanged a glance. We understood then the depth of her fear. The small gas station was both haven and risk, a liminal space where danger could appear out of nowhere. Minutes felt like hours. Then headlights appeared in the fog, coming from the direction of the gas station. Her eyes lit up. "Mom," she whispered. Relief washed over her like sunlight breaking through clouds. She scrambled out of the back seat and ran toward the approaching car, collapsing into her mother's arms. Mark and I watched, silent, the tension slowly unwinding. Yet as we started the car and drove away, the fog seemed heavier, the shadows more persistent. I couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness outside the neon glow still contained threats unseen. The drive back was quiet, filled only with the hum of tires on wet asphalt and the occasional passing truck. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a figure in the fog, but there was nothing. At home, I sat with my journal open, pen hovering over the page. "You never really know how close danger is until you see it in someone else's eyes," I wrote. The memory of her shaking hands, wide eyes, and whispered fears pressed into me. Mark noticed my agitation. "You okay?" he asked, voice low. I nodded, though the tension hadn't lifted. The foggy road and that small gas station had etched themselves into my psyche. That night, sleep eluded me. Dreams of the fog, the lonely station, and the woman's trembling hand reaching out haunted me. Even months later, that stretch of Highway 120 remained a place I avoided, my mind replaying the small details. The neon flicker, the shadows in the pines, the smell of damp jackets in the car. I began noticing subtle shifts in my behavior. I double-checked locks on the house, hesitated before pulling over at roadside stops, and avoided deserted areas. Driving through fog anywhere triggered flashes of that night. Mark was patient, but he could see my nerves. "You're not driving here again, right?" he asked quietly one evening. I shook my head. "It's not just the road. It's realizing how easily someone's life can spiral, and how helpless we are when danger is so close," I said. Even freelance trips I once loved felt riskier. I started taking extra precautions, letting someone know my route, carrying a personal alarm and keeping my phone ready. Fear had sharpened my awareness, but also shadowed moments that should have been mundane. Months passed, and though the memory never fully left me, I began to process it. That night on Highway 120 reminded me that danger often hides in places that seem harmless. A gas station, a foggy road, the gap between ordinary and desperate. I learned to trust my instincts, to recognize fear as a signal rather than a weakness. The woman's vulnerability showed me the fragility of life and the responsibility we carry when we can act. Mark's steady presence reminded me that we can't face every threat alone. And sometimes the simplest acts, pulling over, offering help, staying cautious, can make the difference between safety and tragedy. Now I drive with awareness, journal with reflection, and remember that even ordinary roads hold stories, some terrifying, some hopeful, and some that simply remind us how fleeting normalcy can be. Danger often hides in plain sight. Trust your instincts, act with empathy, and never underestimate how quickly lives can be threatened and how crucial small acts of courage can be. The wind tore through the gaps in the car door, rattling the frame and whispering over the frozen asphalt like it had secrets to tell. I shivered and tightened my scarf, wishing I'd packed something warmer than a thin jacket. Montana in late winter wasn't what I'd expected from the pictures online. It was sharper, lonelier, colder. The kind of cold that seeps into your bones and refuses to leave, like it had a purpose. Jenna was humming along to the low static of the car radio, her fingers tapping the wheel in a rhythm that almost made me forget the miles of emptiness stretching ahead. I'd insisted on taking this trip, wanted to see the vastness of the West, the way the light hit snow-covered plains, the abandoned buildings that held a kind of quiet poetry. But for every mile of beauty there was a mile of nothing. And sometimes, that nothing felt alive. I pulled my camera from the seat beside me, fiddling with the strap. Do you ever feel like you're driving into a story you can't get out of? I asked, voice quieter than I intended. Jenna glanced at me, one eyebrow raised. Only every time we leave the last gas station for 50 miles. I laughed nervously. It's more than that, I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I'm running from something. She sighed. Running from your brother's nagging or from your own paranoia? I didn't answer. I knew the truth. Earlier that morning I'd had the same argument I'd had 100 times before with Alex. He thought I was wasting my life chasing shadows, chasing images that didn't pay rent or bills. I didn't tell him how wrong he was, or maybe I couldn't. Photography wasn't just my passion. It was the only thing that ever felt honest to me. And yet, there was a gnawing fear that maybe he was right. That in all these miles, all these clicks of the shutter, I was only trying to prove something to someone who'd never care. The gas gauge dipped dangerously low, a flashing red light glaring at me like a warning. Next stop, gas, Jenna said. I don't care how creepy it looks. When we finally saw the neon glow of the abandoned station, it felt like a relief. The sign flickered sporadically, letters dying mid-blink. A tumbleweed scraped across the asphalt, making the silence heavier. I parked under the weak glow, the tires crunching over the thin layer of ice. The building had clearly been out of service for years. Paint peeling, windows dusty, pumps dented and lifeless. It feels wrong, I whispered, gripping the pump handle and pretending to check the gauge. I don't know why, but it feels wrong. Jenna shot me a look. It's abandoned, that's all. Just focus on not freezing to death, okay? Her humor helped, a little. But it didn't last. A voice sliced through the cold. Hey. Hey there. I froze. The sound didn't come from the gas station. It came from the shadowed edge of the lot. A man stepped forward. Brown coat, red shorts. The absurdity of the clothing didn't make him any less unsettling. He walked with deliberate steps, the kind of slow, deliberate that makes your heart skip in ways you can't explain. Jenna moved closer to me. Let's just go, she whispered. My hand twitched toward the camera hanging at my chest. Every instinct screamed danger, but some part of me wanted to see him clearly, to frame him, to understand before panic. He stopped 10 feet away, tilting his head as if assessing us, then muttered into a flip phone. The red shorts flashed in the neon light, ridiculous, unsettling, like something from a dream you wish you could forget. I swallowed, the bitter air scraping my throat. The distance between us seemed smaller with every second, and I realized then that sometimes fear isn't the absence of sense. It's the presence of the unknown, the unmeasured, the unpredictable. He didn't approach further, but his presence was heavier than the snow. Jenna straightened her shoulders. "We're not alone," she called out, trying to sound braver than she felt. The man flinched, his eyes flicking toward us, then back at the dark stretch of highway. His flip phone snapped shut with a sound that made me jump. He melted into the shadows before we could make a decision. I exhaled sharply, feeling adrenaline ripple through my veins. "Did you see that? He just disappeared." Jenna nodded, gripping the wheel. "Yeah, and I don't want to see him again." We stayed in the car for a few moments, the hum of the heater barely cutting through the chill. I clutched my camera, fingers tight around the strap. The abandoned gas station no longer felt like a stop, it felt like a trap. The shadows seemed thicker now, the neon flickers more urgent, warning us to leave. "I shouldn't have argued with Alex today," I muttered. "I shouldn't have left him. Left anyone." Jenna glanced at me, eyes soft. "Harper, you're here now. That's what matters. You're not alone." I wanted to believe her. But even as we drove back onto the empty highway, the image of him, brown coat, red shorts, unblinking stare, stayed with me. I thought of the documentaries I'd seen, the warnings about travelers alone in the night, stories of strangers who preyed on the isolated. The camera on my shoulder felt suddenly heavier. Hours passed in silence. Snow whipped against the windshield, tires hissing on ice. I rested my head against the window, but my mind replayed the scene endlessly. I felt exposed, vulnerable, aware that danger didn't always announce itself. Sometimes it waited. Sometimes it smiled behind a mask of absurdity. By the time we found a safe motel in Bozeman, my hands were numb, not just from the cold, but from the lingering tension. I couldn't shake the feeling that the man was watching, that the abandoned gas station had eyes, that the world was bigger, darker, and more unpredictable than I'd allowed myself to think. Even after days on the road, I couldn't shake the memory of him. Every gas station, every flickering neon light, every shadow stretching longer than it should, sent a shiver through me. I tried to photograph the landscapes, to remind myself why I was here. But my shots began to reflect tension. Empty pumps, snow-laden rooftops, a car door left open. The camera no longer captured beauty alone. It captured the echo of fear, the sense of being watched. Jenna noticed my change. "You're different," she said one night as we set up camp near a frozen river. "You're seeing something most people miss. Or maybe something is missing inside you now." I didn't argue. She was right. There was a vulnerability I couldn't shake, a reminder that solitude on the road carried risks beyond the physical, and fear had a way of following you home. Weeks later, I found myself back at a gas station on the outskirts of Billings. The neon flickered. I felt it before I saw it, a presence, maybe imagined, maybe real. My hands tightened on the camera. I remembered the man in red shorts, the brown coat, the slow, measured steps. I realized then that I wasn't just afraid of strangers. I was afraid of helplessness, of the unknown, of what could happen when preparation meets unpredictability. And I knew that fear, while primal, could teach me. It could teach me caution, awareness, and the value of trusting someone beside you. Jenna and I drove in silence for the next hours. We didn't talk about the man. Words wouldn't help. We relied on instinct and companionship. I realized that fear is not just a reaction, it's a teacher if you let it be. I continued photographing empty stations, highways, abandoned towns. My work changed. It captured tension, the faint suggestion of a watcher, the vulnerability in wide open spaces. And while I still shivered when I saw a shadow too long or a flickering neon sign, I had learned to honor the feeling rather than let it dominate me. The moral, I think, is simple. The world contains unknown dangers, yes, but fear only paralyzes if faced alone. Companionship, vigilance, and self-awareness are the real shields. And sometimes, documenting the darkness isn't just about art. It's about learning to navigate life with your eyes wide open. Fear and vulnerability are inevitable, but they become manageable when we acknowledge them, stay aware, and rely on the trust and presence of others. Real courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting wisely despite it.